are present. I only required counsel to be here in St. Luke's et al. Versus Ammon Bundy et al. 01226789. Over the weekend, I was giving some thought to this case, and I would like some clarification as to the equitable relief being sought by the plaintiffs. I'm not sure exactly what relief you're seeking, other than that was mentioned in the prayer for relief. And so if you could give me some clarification, because I'm going to have to make a determination on that at the end of this trial as well.
Understood, Your Honor. We will be looking for some equitable relief preventing the continuing defamatory statements. What we could do, Your Honor, is I think it would be appropriate for us to narrow what we can, and we could provide what we believe would be an appropriate narrowing, Your Honor, as part of the briefing we need to provide the court.
Obviously, there's a fine balance between freedom of speech and crossing that line, and so it seems to me that any equitable relief would have to be narrowly tailored based on the specific facts of this case. So some guidance of what you're seeking would be appreciated.
And we will provide that, Your Honor. And we do have a couple matters. That's the last item on the court's list. We have a couple matters to raise too.
I thought more about this case than that, but that's all I
sorry,
had. No,
no,
that's all I wanted to bring up this morning. So,
Your Honor, we were informed by Ms. Erickson that she saw one of the jurors at math at her church service. She didn't interact with him, but she did see him, and we just wanted to. She's uncertain as to whether the juror saw her. She doesn't know him. She didn't know him before, but we just wanted to come bring that to the court's attention in case that became any kind of issue.
all right, let's make a little bit more of a record, if you don't mind, Doctor. How far away was this person at the service?
I believe we saw in the ski section of the church. The church is divided into 3 different main sections. We were pretty close together in proximity.
Okay. You don't know this individual, though?
No, I've never met him before.
All right.
I actually don't usually go to the service that I went to yesterday, but because I was volunteering in the church at a later time, I went to an earlier service. So
Okay.
I've never seen him there before.
All right. And did it appear that he recognized you, or really not necessarily?
Because I noticed him and it had immediate recognition in the interest of maintaining integrity. I didn't want to approach or acknowledge or anything.
Perfect. That's exactly what you should have done. So I'll ask the jurors if anything happened. And it may be that that person did not necessarily notice you, or they'll bring it to the court's attention. But the conduct you described is not concerning to me. Thank you.
The other matter, Your Honor, is we do believe that we're going to be able to finish by Friday as the court's directed. And we were wondering, Your Honor, just for scheduling, some of these matters we're talking about getting resolved in special verdict and those things. We're suggesting that maybe we set aside some time on Thursday afternoon that might accommodate the court schedule to address some of that. So we just raise that for the court to consider as we march toward trying to get some decision resolved before then.
All right. I'll take a better look at our court calendar and make a determination. How much time are you requesting?
Your Honor, we would think that maybe an hour and a half, but it's, again, depending upon what issues the court might have regarding that special verdict form, which we know the court hasn't seen yet. And the court hasn't had a chance yet to look at the inference motion, and we also owe the court, which we anticipate being to the court no later than Wednesday morning, some of that briefing on public figure. So those are the things, Your Honor, we would be thinking might be best addressed on Thursday at some point.
I'll give that some thought.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else to take up?
I don't believe so, Your Honor. The only thing I would also add is we represented Ms. Youngman start today, but owing to scheduling of other witnesses, she won't be starting today. Our order has changed up a little bit. We do have a full slate, but there's been a little bit of change in the order.
All right, who are you calling today then?
Ms. Grandy will first be calling Dennis Massaros. Then I will be calling Dr. Jim Souza. Then Ms. Grandy will be calling Dr. Johnson. And then I would be calling Dr. Erickson's husband, Jeff Erickson. And Your Honor, if we still have time over, we would anticipate starting Tracy Young for the balance of the day if we're that lucky to make that much progress.
Well, we threatened to start with her on Friday, so
So
we
she's
may
on
actually
deck. She's on deck.
we may actually get to you today or not. Ms. Grande, I want to apologize. I think I referred to you as Ms. Grand, which is not necessarily a negative comment.
I appreciate that, Your Honor. It's actually Grandy.
Grandy. Okay, I'll try and get that right, but my mistake. Okay, I don't know if we have all the jurors and can start a few minutes early or not. Thank you. All right, we're just waiting for one juror. I'll just step off, and then we'll plan on starting up at 8:30 as that juror arrives. And counsel, you know we're stopping at noon.
We understand.
Okay.
Your jury is present and accounted for.
Thank you. Please be seated. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Did anything happen over the weekend recess to affect your qualifications to serve? Seeing none. Plaintiffs may call their next witness.
The plaintiff's called Dennis Mazzaros, Your Honor.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this matter and after the court should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, sir. Would you please state your full name and spell your last name for the record?
Dennis Massaros, M as in Mary, E, S as in Sam, A-R-O-S.
Very good. Ms. Grande, you may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Mazzaros, since it's 8:30 in the morning, I'll ask you an easy one. Who's your current employer?
I currently work with St. Luke's Health System.
And how long have you been employed at St. Luke's?
Just over 9 years.
And if you could tell us what your current title is at St. Luke's?
I serve as a vice president for population health.
And broadly, what are the duties of the vice president for population health?
Yeah, I'm overall accountable for ensuring access to acute care services. I am accountable for acute care services, access to acute care services, for the quality and outcomes of patient care, and then the safety of staff.
And Mr. Mazeros, does your reach, is it all over the health system, or do you focus on specific hospitals within St. Luke's?
I have 3 hospitals I'm accountable for, and that includes St. Luke's Regional Medical Center, St. Luke's McCall Medical Center, and St. Luke's Elmore Medical Center.
And Mr. Mazeros, when you report to work, although you have responsibilities for those 3 hospitals, where do you physically, where's your office physically located?
The Boise campus.
Sir, I'm trying to adjust your microphone, but you have a softer voice, and if you could speak up a little, but let us see if we can adjust it. All right, give it a try.
How's this, Your Honor?
That's much better.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. So, Mr. Mazeros, could you give us an overview of your educational background before you came to work for St. Luke's? We'll start with, where did you attend college?
Undergraduate, University of Maryland,
And what degree did you achieve there?
economics.
And what did you do after that?
I went to graduate school,
And where was that?
Seton Hall University in South Orange, New Jersey.
And what did you study while at Seton Hall?
Health policy and management.
And after you graduated with your degree in health policy management, did you go on to work in that field?
Yes, I took on a residency at Metro Health Medical Center, a county hospital in Cleveland, Ohio.
And was that your first job in healthcare administration?
Yes, it was.
And what was your next job in that field?
So I did a short time in consulting and then also working for an insurance company.
And did you go on to work at any other healthcare administrations prior to your position at St. Luke's?
Yes, absolutely. I spent 8 years with Holy Cross Hospital in Silver Spring, Maryland. And then I spent 6 years at Providence Health and Services in Washington State, and then recruited to come here at St. Luke's.
And about what year were you recruited to come to St. Luke's?
2014.
And at that time, were you in your current position?
No, I was the site administrator at the Meridian campus.
And what were the responsibilities of the site administrator for the Meridian campus?
Similar, maintaining access to acute care services, ensuring the quality and outcomes of services, and then also the safety of staff.
And so when did you move into your current role as the Vice President for Population Health?
2.5 years ago.
So fair to say that at the time that's relevant to this lawsuit, approximately March of 2022, you were in that role at that time?
Yes, that's correct.
So turning now to those events, when did you first learn about the events that had taken place at St. Luke's Meridian late on March 11th, leading into the early morning of March 12th?
It was the early morning hours of Saturday, March 12th.
And how did you first learn of those events?
My chief operating officer was on site at the Boise campus, and she called me on Saturday morning.
And what did she relay to you about the events that had occurred?
She informed me what had happened on the Meridian campus, that an infant came on site, and due to the condition of the infant, needed acute care hospitalization to be admitted to the hospital, the Children's Hospital.
Did you understand that there had been a disruption in the ambulance bay at the Meridian Hospital that was related to the care of that infant?
Yes, that resulted in arrests.
And did you understand who had been arrested as part of that disruption?
Yes, Mr. Emmett Bundy.
Were you familiar with Mr. Bundy before you heard his name that morning from your COO?
Yes.
What did you do in response, if anything, to this phone call from your chief operating officer?
I got dressed and came onto the Boise campus.
At approximately what time was that?
It was before 10. It was probably between 9 and 10 in the morning.
And when you arrived at the Boise campus, what was the first order of business?
I went into the conference room that serves as incident command and established an incident command.
And we've heard the term incident command before in the course of this trial, but could you explain sort of broadly what incident command is?
Sure. The federal Emergency Management Administration deems hospitals as necessary services, especially during a crisis situation. It could be a weather event, it could be a mass casualty, or it could be a threat such as cybersecurity, or in this case, a threat of violence.
So what if overall is the purpose or requirement for having incident command? What is the goal of that structure?
Maintain operations as a critical service to the community.
And do you have any specific certifications or training experience with incident command that you had before you held your position with St. Luke's?
Yes.
And could you describe that for us now?
Sure. I've spent time with FEMA in terms of going through a formal training program. In addition, I've served in incident command roles at other facilities due to weather emergencies, as well as potential mass casualties.
Have you had occasion during your time at St. Luke's to be part of previous incident commands?
Yes.
And what have those generally been in response to?
The most recent one was our pandemic, in which we had to maintain operations during major capacity challenges.
And Mr. Mazeros, the jury has previously heard testimony from Mr. Roth that there was in effect 2 levels of incident command that were stood up at that time. Is that consistent with your recollection?
Yes, it is. There's a site-based incident command, boots on the ground for operational decision-making, and then reporting up to the system for additional support or resources that we may need.
And is it fair to say that you were in that more boots-on-the-ground incident command structure?
Correct.
And what role did you hold within the incident command structure?
Incident commander.
And could you explain to the jury what the incident commander does, or what that role and responsibility entails?
Receives input from a variety of sources and makes decisions or escalations.
And as incident commander for that local boots-on-the-ground incident command in Boise, were you then in turn making reports to the system-level incident command?
Yes.
We've also heard that the phrase that incident command is stood up. Does that imply that there's a point where incident command stands down?
Yes.
And could you explain to us how that decision is made or how that occurs?
Again, you're looking at different inputs and you're making decisions relative to, is there a continued threat? Has a threat subsided? Is this something that needs to be continued or stood up for 24 hours? Or is there a pause in the activity that you could stand down?
Okay. So, as I understand it, you arrive at the Boise campus the morning of March 12th, sometime before 10 a.m. and stand up incident command. What are the priorities of incident command and of you as the incident commander that morning?
It was first and foremost interacting with the security team because the crowd that was growing outside. It was second, interacting with the care team to understand in terms of how the infant was. And then lastly, it was interacting with Child Protective Services, CPS, relative to the status of the situation.
So let's start with security. Ms. Gamboa, may I ask you to pull up demonstrative exhibit 043? And Mr. Mazaros, what actions did you take relative to understanding the security concerns and threat that St. Luke's was facing that morning?
You always want to lay eyes on the situation if at all possible. And I walked up to the pediatric sky bridge that connects the pediatric unit to the ambulatory center, and I looked over at the street Avenue B, and I could see in terms of a crowd gathering.
And Mr. Mazaros, we've put up an image of St. Luke's there, and I believe a laser pointer exists, and you've located excellent. So could you show us where you were standing?
Right here.
And I believe you've identified that as the pediatric sky bridge?
Correct.
And then could you indicate with the laser pointer again where you were able to observe the crowds?
Oh. They were lining Avenue B. So it was a crowd that was gathered not only on the sidewalk approximate to the hospital by the emergency entrance, but it was also in the middle of Avenue B.
And I think you can kind of see there's a median there, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And when you looked down from the sky bridge, what observations did you have about the crowd that had gathered there?
I saw visible arms, sidearms. I saw numerous signs that stated free baby Cyrus, kidnapping, medical kidnapping, and I saw Mr. Bundy.
What was your reaction to seeing everything you just described?
that we face a serious threat to operations.
And the jury has previously seen the threat assessment report admitted in this case as Exhibit 42. Are you also familiar with this document?
Yes.
And Ms. Gambo, if you could pull up Exhibit 42 and go to page 4. And in that second paragraph, Ms. Gambo, if you could, it's the second paragraph after the photo of Mr. Bundy. If you could pull that up for us. Now I see there, Mr. Mazzaros, that it says...
Counsel, is this an admitted
It
exhibit?
is, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was admitted with Mr. Roth. I see there that it says, prior to the protests, the Federal Bureau of Investigation advised that threats against the Boise Hospital had been noted on social media, resulting in the facility being placed into partial lockdown. Is that consistent with your recollection?
Yes, it is.
And could you help us understand what partial lockdown means in the context of this threat assessment report?
An increased security presence on the campus over and above what we typically have, in addition to not all doors being accessible and open.
Were there particular hospitals where security was increased in particular?
The emergency department was an area in which we increased our security presence.
Okay. And Ms. Gambo, you can take that down at this point. Thank you. You said, Mr. Mazzaros, that another step you were taking at this time were working with CPS. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And why were you working with CPS at this time?
The parents were in the emergency department demanding to see their child, and in a CPS case, the custody is with Child Protective Services. We're not able to provide any visitation unless approved by CPS.
And so you as incident commander were coordinating with CPS on the terms and conditions of whatever visitation they would allow.
Correct.
And I think it's clear, but could you just explain why there was the need to work with the Department of Health and Welfare on this case in particular?
I don't know how much history was provided, but this is an infant that was, again, clinically, you'll have to excuse me, but was dehydrated and malnourished. And this was the situation in which police had to take custody of this infant. So this infant was admitted and needed nutrition.
And I believe you said that one of the priorities you were working on that morning was also working with pediatric staff that were caring for the infant. Is that correct?
Correct.
What concerns do you remember addressing with them at that time?
Well, based on the events that transpired in advance, our pediatric care team was extremely concerned about the protest activity. There was well awareness that there was doxing activity that was going on relative to the prior clinical care team, and our team was really concerned about being anonymous and being able to care for this infant without additional threats against their personal safety.
And Mr. Mazzaros, on that March 12th, were there any steps that Incident Command and St. Luke's were taking to address those concerns that had been raised by the care team?
Yes, we rounded on the care team and wanted to check in terms of their own well-being. We increased the security on the pediatric unit, and then also we worked with them around anonymity. They didn't want to wear their badges. They didn't want to have what is known as a charter on the floor in terms of their pictures and their names, and they wanted to make sure that the web did not have their pictures on it as well.
And were steps taken to remove their images from St. Luke's website?
Yes.
Mr. Mazzaros, you testified earlier that in essence you oversee quality of care and related issues for the Boise Hospital and are overall concerned with its operations and smooth operations. As of March 12th, were you seeing any effect on the hospital's operations relative to these disruptions that were occurring?
They were immediate. We had a patient that was at the St. Al's campus that needed a life flight patient to be life flighted to the Boise campus. Light flight refused to come to the campus. We also had challenges in terms of going to the emergency department with Air St. Luke's mobile units because of fear. Life flight was afraid in terms of potential gunfire and the potential risk associated with a low-flying aircraft.
And to be clear, they were concerned about the helicopter being targeted by gunfire.
Correct.
And again, I heard you testify earlier that you yourself observed, I think you said, arms on some of the protesters. I want to be a little clear about that. What kind of arms did you observe?
Firearms.
And specifically?
Sidearms.
Okay. And when were you able to, I believe, I'm going to use this term correctly, but stand down incident command on March 12th?
It wasn't until later that evening, after we had worked with CPS to identify in terms of a safe visit for the parents, in addition to interaction with law enforcement to ensure that we would have presence with law enforcement on campus as well.
And I know you said you at one point observed with your own eyes the presence that had gathered, the crowd that had gathered. Did you have information about whether that crowd had increased or decreased in size during March 12th?
It increased throughout the day.
But at some point, you perceived that it had dispersed.
Reports came in later in the evening that the crowd had dispersed.
Okay. Did you again report to work on Sunday, March 13th?
Yes, we did.
About what time?
It was before 8 in the morning.
And did you again stand up incident command?
Yes.
The previous day on March 12th, it sounds like your focus was security, coordinating with the patient care team, and being the liaison to CPS. Were those again your priorities on March
Yes.
13th? So let's start again with security. What were the state of disruptions on Sunday, March 13th, that morning, if you recall?
One of the first reports that we received were calls that started coming in the day prior and continued through Sunday relative to initially curiosity relative to the patient's condition, and then more violent.
So let's start with those first type of calls. You said curiosity regarding the infant's condition. What was being reported to you as far as those type of calls and the substance of them?
People wanted to know why we had kidnapped the infant and taken the infant away from his mother.
And what sort of response was St. Luke's providing when it was receiving those kind of calls?
We didn't acknowledge that we had the infant because the infant was under CPS custody, as they do not publish to protect the parents and the family members. So these poor individuals from the Children's Hospital were taking the phone call. We're just getting barraged. They were called liars. On one call, which I had the opportunity to listen to, a woman was called, "You fucking bitch, you're lying to me."
You used a term there that I want to explore a little bit. It's do not publish. Could you help explain to the jury when a patient is designated as do not publish, what does that mean logistically as far as the hospital's ability to provide any kind of information?
The only individuals that know that the patient's in the hospital is the care team. The individuals answering the phone call do not know that patient's in the hospital.
Fair to say St. Luke's could not provide any information about the infant, including that he was even at St. Luke's.
Correct.
So you talked about a different type of phone call that was beginning to come in, or had increased at least as of Sunday, March 13th, as more threatening. How were you learning about those phone calls?
From the security team, we were getting information verbatim. I later had the opportunity to listen to the phone calls.
And what do you remember about the reports about the contents of those calls?
The volume, and then just the threats of violence.
Do you remember any threats in particular that were reported to you?
I'll fucking kill you, that we were sex trafficking, that groups were coming.
And again, who was monitoring the volume and the content of those phone calls for St. Luke's?
We had stood up a threat assessment team.
And who was leading that threat assessment team?
Our security leader, Abby.
Fair to say that Abby was then, in turn, making those reports to Incident Command?
Yes.
So what was your focus in terms of your work with CPS on Sunday, March 13th?
Let's make sure we can get a safe patient family visit.
And what did that plan, how was that developed, and ultimately what was that plan for that safe visit with the family?
With input from law enforcement, it was recommended that we hold the visit off of a patient care unit, that we find an area that would allow privacy, that we would have a clinician accompany the infant on that visit if there were any comments, any questions, and that we would have law enforcement. We also asked the parents to respect our visitation guidelines, which included no firearms, masking as well. This was during COVID.
And those visitation guidelines, are those just St. Luke's general visitation guidelines applicable to anyone who's visiting a patient in the hospital?
Yes.
What were some of the concerns related to the visit that plan was designed to address?
We didn't know if the parents would try to run with the child, or if they would come in armed, or if other individuals would try to come in with the parents.
Did that visit ultimately take place?
Yes, it did.
And do you remember approximately what time the parents came in to visit the infant?
Between 7 and 7:30 p.m., and they stayed till probably about 9:15, 9:30.
So approximately a 2-hour visit?
That's correct.
And did the Department of Health and Welfare approve and have input in the development of this plan?
Yes, they did. They interacted directly with the parents on the visit.
And were you receiving real-time reports about the visit while it was occurring?
Yes.
And what did you come to understand was going on with the visit?
The visit was going well. The parents were extremely respectful. There was a house supervisor, a house officer that is a nurse, a NICU nurse that accompanied the infant. She stepped back and allowed the family members to spend time with the patient.
Did the parents ultimately comply with the visitation requirements that St. Luke's has?
Yes, they were very well, they did not wear masks, and we made a decision to provide grace in that situation.
But you're concerned about firearms? They didn't? No
They did
concerns
not.
there?
They did not.
Okay.
They did not carry, I'm sorry.
So the parents left, it sounds, around 9:30 that night, is that correct?
That is correct.
And what, were you still at the hospital at that time?
We debriefed after the visit, and we thought the visit went well.
Okay. So now we're at the late evening of Sunday, March 13th. Were there any concerns that you, as in your operational role for the Boise Hospital, had going into a Monday, into a weekday, the following day?
Mondays are one of the busiest days in a hospital. For better, for worse, people put off going to the emergency department until Monday. Mondays are the busiest days that we'll see in an emergency department. During a weekend, you don't have elective cases. You're open for emergency cases. You're open for strokes and heart attacks. You don't have elective surgery scheduled. Monday is a first day where you'll have elective surgery scheduled, so we'll typically see about 120 patients in the emergency department, about 60 surgeries on a Monday.
Fair to say you were concerned that there would be an increase for interaction between the crowds and an increased patient visitation at St. Luke's?
The risk to operations is substantially greater on a Monday than they were on a weekend.
Mr. Mazzaros, after that visit with the parents, that 2-hour visit that occurred, what was kind of your sense of where things were as far as the escalation of the situation that had been occurring at the St. Luke's Boise campus?
There was great communication relative to the clinical condition of the infant, what the plan was relative to the infant's care, and we thought the parents were in a good place.
Were you hopeful that the situation would see some amount of de-escalation at that time?
Hopeful is a great word. We were extremely hopeful that it would lower the temperature outside with the disruptors.
And did you again report to work on Monday, March 14th?
Yes, it did.
And did that hope you had that the situation would de-escalate come to pass?
It passed very quickly.
And why do you say that?
The narrative that the hospital was abusing the infant was furthered by pictures that were taken during the parents' visit of the infant and then posted on the freedomman.org website.
Ms. Gamboa, could I ask you to pull up Exhibit 369? Your Honor, this is a previously admitted exhibit, and specifically we're going to be looking at page 1630.
One moment, please, while I confirm. All
No
right,
problem.
369 came in through Mr. Burghardt.
You did.
It may be published.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Gambo, may I ask you to pull out, so make larger the screenshot we see there. Mr. Mazzaros, have you seen this document before?
Yes, I have.
And it looks there that this was a update posted on the Freedom Man website at 11:50 a.m. Would you mind reading for the jury the text that appears under that blue title?
Baby Cyrus has been in custody of the state and is now at St. Luke's Pediatric Hospital in downtown Boise. He has been in their, quote, care since approximately 1 a.m. Saturday morning, March 12th. Levi and Marissa were, quote, allowed to see their own child last night for 2 hours while escorted by Idaho State Police and a social worker. Baby Cyrus is in worse condition than ever. Levi and Marissa reported that he is not even the same child. He is unresponsive and lethargic, and his spirit has completely changed. He is unrecognizable from the child he was when they stole him away from us.
Mr. Mazzaros, is this an example of the type of narrative you came to be aware was circulating amongst Mr. Rodriguez, Mr. Bundy, and their supporters, that St. Luke's was actively harming the infant?
Yes.
And could you just comment on that? You were in communication with the pediatric care team. What was the status of the infant late on Sunday night going into Monday morning?
He was actually gaining weight. There were ongoing clinical concerns around oral aversion, in addition to a potential need for a GI consult because he just was not eating. But there had been success relative to him gaining weight while he was at the hospital.
Do you have any understanding of how they could say that there was any thought that he was being harmed?
It blew our minds. We couldn't comprehend what was being stated.
And any reason to believe that they could have taken anything from that visit on Sunday that would indicate that he was in any way being harmed?
No. Especially since a nurse accompanied during the visit and was there for questions and answers.
Mr. Mazzaros, may I ask you to turn in your binder to Exhibit 45? And could you just tell us what sort of document are you looking at there?
This is an email that was forwarded to me.
And what date was it received to you, or forwarded to you, I'm sorry?
Sunday, March 13th.
And who sent it to you?
It was sent by the vice president for the foundation, external affairs.
And Mr. Mazzaros, you've testified previously that St. Luke's was receiving a number of calls related to the infant. Was it also receiving a number of emails?
Yes, it was.
Your Honor, I move at this time for the admission of Exhibit 45 and ask for it to be published to the jury.
All right, so this, I understand it's a document of St. Luke's that they've kept. So it's authenticated under 902, correct?
Yes, it is a business record. It's been previously authenticated by the Lyon Declaration, but in addition, Mr. Mazzaros, of course, received it.
Okay. However, it is hearsay. Are you offering it not for the truth of the matter, but just for the effect on the listener?
Correct, Your Honor.
All right. For that reason, the court's going to admit Exhibit 45, and it may be published.
And Ms. Gamboa, if you could pull out the text that's kind of in the middle of the page, that's the email that Jeff forwarded to Mr. Mazzaros. And Mr. Mazzaros, could you, what do you remember about receiving this email?
It was furthering the narrative, and it was consistent with the phone calls that were coming in.
And could you read, so the jury can hear it out loud, the email that was coming into St. Luke's?
Why did you steal that baby? Are you going to kill it like the Democrats want to do and sell his parts? If not, why did that doctor think he had the right to steal a baby from good parents? The doctor knew the baby needed his mom's milk, but he stole the baby. And what kind of hospital do you run where doctors steal babies by lying to police? He gave this baby a clean bill of health, so why did he steal the baby? Are you all a part of the ring that sells babies or babies' parts?
And Mr. Mazzaros, what was your reaction to receiving this email?
Discussed.
And again, this isn't the only email St. Luke's received along these lines, is it?
No.
In that email, there's an allegation about the baby's needing his mother's milk. Were you involved in efforts to coordinate the mother being able to provide breast milk to the child?
Yes. From the point in time of admission, we worked with the mom to make sure that she could exchange, the express milk for the infant.
And deliver it to St. Luke's?
Yes.
You can take that down, Ms. Kimbo. Thank you. Mr. Mazeros, did St. Luke's again on March 14th coordinate with the Department of Health and Welfare to arrange for the infant's parents to visit him again?
Yes.
And do you remember approximately when that visit took place?
It was in the afternoon. It was mid-afternoon.
And again, what was your impression, or were you receiving reports from that visit in real time?
Yes.
And again, what was your perception of how that visit was going?
Visit went well. Parents were a little bit more in terms of questioning relative to have we vaccinated their infant.
And why were they raising those concerns, to your understanding?
They had repeatedly told us that they did not want to vaccinate their infant, which we, again, respected their wishes.
Mr. Mazzaros, let's move now to Tuesday, March 15th. Did you again report to the Boise Hospital on March 15th?
Yes.
And again, about what time?
Early morning hours, 0700.
Was the first order of the day to again stand up incident command?
Yes, it was.
And what did you learn that morning regarding whether the infant's condition?
The infant was medically stable and ready to be discharged.
And did you work with Incident Command to come up with a plan for discharge?
Yes, we worked with Incident Command and, again, CPS relative to what the plan for discharge would be.
Were there others involved in that conversation about the plan to safely discharge the infant?
The clinical care team, security, and Child Protective Services.
Were you worried you would not be able to safely discharge the infant?
Yes, we were seeing the crowd substantially grow in size.
And what was the concern about that growing crowd?
That, in addition to the threats, was that there would be an effort to forcibly take the infant from the hospital if not released to the family by CPS.
So on the morning of March 15th, what was the situation with the crowd that had been, consistently showing up to St. Luke's for the past couple of days?
It was not as large initially, and what we had learned is they had gathered at other locations, the courthouse.
And what was your understanding about why they were gathering at the courthouse instead of St. Luke's?
There was, I believe, a scheduled hearing relative to custody.
Was there a point where you remember the size of the crowd shifting?
Absolutely. At about 1 p.m. on that day, there was a feed that we received from Incident Command, and it showed Mr. Bundy, and ultimately what was a call to action, stating that the infant was not going to be released to the parents' custody, and that he was headed to the hospital to sort things out. This was an emergency situation, and he asked other followers to immediately come to the hospital.
And again, did you review that video in real time?
Yes.
When that video went out and you saw it, what was your reaction about what that meant for as far as St. Luke's and your need to respond in your role as incident commander?
That video, along with the threats that were coming in and the intelligence that we were receiving, that there would be an effort to forcibly enter the hospital and take the infant, was that we needed to have an increased law enforcement presence on this campus, number one, and number two, we needed to move the infant who was medically stable to CPS custody and out of the hospital sooner as opposed to later.
So you said you needed an increased presence from law enforcement, and was that the Boise Police Department?
Yes, it was.
And did Boise police officers report to St. Luke's at that time?
Yes, they did.
Were they previously already on site that morning?
They were near the campus and around the campus, but not the same size.
Did the officers ultimately join you in incident command?
I had 2 officers join me in incident command. Officers Ransom and Jones.
After that video, and I'll represent that the jury's seen that as Exhibit 175 in this matter, went out from Mr. Bundy, what did you observe about the crowd outside?
The hostility had really grown. They had moved from primarily by the emergency department entrance and Avenue B to in cars circling the campus. So they would come from Avenue B, make a right turn on the Bannock corridor, and then make a right turn up First, and then Jefferson, make another right turn. So horns were honking, people were yelling. In addition, the protesters had circled the hospital, so they were the disruption was not just centered in one location, but the disruptors appeared to be at all the entryways and exitways of the hospital.
Ms. Gambo, I may ask you to put up demonstrative 043 again. Mr. Mazaros, can you illustrate for the jury using your laser pointer sort of what you were seeing as far as the vehicle traffic that St. Luke's was now seeing?
They would be coming from Avenue B down Bannock Street, and this is where you're seeing individuals park and come into the hospital for care or into the Cancer Institute. They would come down Bannock, make a right turn on First Street, and they would make a right turn on Jefferson Street and then come back around the hospital.
And Mr. Mazaros, where were you at this time?
I was in the incident command area, but I would also come out and come into my office right in this location.
And from your office, could you see the cars and the traffic you just described?
Yes.
You said at this time that if St. Luke's was now encircled with protesters, what did you take from the fact that protesters were now surrounding the St. Luke's Boise campus?
That we were at a substantial risk for a forcible entry.
And again, who was with you at incident command at this time that the cars are circling and people are beginning to circle the campus?
I had multiple individuals from the internal security team. We had members of the care team. We had 2 officers from law enforcement. I had my chief nurse officer with me.
After Mr. Bundy's video went out, how soon would you estimate that those cars and an increased number of people showed up at St. Luke's?
It seemed within minutes. Just a reflection back, my chief medical officer, Frank Johnson, was in that office as well.
Okay. In incident command?
Yes, thank you.
And I believe you said there were 2 Boise police officers with you in incident command, right?
Correct. Matt Jones and Josiah Ransom.
What was did they provide an assessment to the incident command team at this time about the security risk that St. Luke's was facing?
They had informed me that the crowd had increased in size substantially. They mentioned they had about 30 officers on site, but they would not be able to hold them back if there was a forced entry.
When Boise police provided you with that assessment, what did that mean to you?
That I had to lock down the hospital completely.
Who made the call to lock down the hospital?
I did.
And could you tell us what a lockdown means? When the hospital went into lockdown, what does that mean for logistics for the hospital's operations?
It means we're closed to the community. It means we're closed to community care. It means that if you're having a heart attack, that you'll have to find a different facility to go to. It means if your child has a trauma, as the only children's hospital, that potentially you're going to be moving that kid through, hopefully, the air to Salt Lake City or to Portland. It means you're closed to the community for cancer services, that patients that are prepped for surgery can't get into the doors. It's the worst possible situation.
And as far as the folks who were inside of St. Luke's, your providers, your patients, what did that mean? What did the lockdown mean for them?
No one leaves the building.
Mr. Mazzaros, how was the lockdown after you made the decision to go into lockdown? How was that decision communicated to St. Luke's?
We have three means for communication to all staff. One is it's called an Everbridge, which we send a text message to everybody's cell phone. So everybody has a cell phone, so that goes out immediately. Then we'll also send an email, and then we'll do an overhead page. And then lastly, we'll also round to make sure people understand the situation.
Mr. Mazzaros, may I ask you to turn towards Exhibit 52 in your binder there. Do you recognize this communication?
I do.
And is this one of the communication methods you use to communicate the lockdown to St. Luke's staff?
Yes.
Your Honor, Exhibit 52 is authenticated via the second McCraney Declaration and the Aubrey Lyon Declaration attached to that as a business record of St. Luke's, and we move for its admission at this time.
Exhibit 52 is admitted and may be published.
Ms. Gambo, would you help us zoom in a little bit there? Mr. Mazzaros, do you recognize this as the Everbridge communication you had explained to the jury?
Yes.
And could you just read that for us?
This is not a drill. An external threat has been identified at Boise Hospital location, and a lockdown is in progress. Do not enter or exit the building. If you are outside of the building, go to a safe location away from the property. If you are inside the building, stay inside and do not open the doors for anyone. Wait for further instruction.
Mr. Mazzaros, in your 30 years as a healthcare administrator, had you ever had to call a code lockdown before?
No, I've not.
Why did you feel you needed to do it now, at this point?
I'm responsible for hundreds of staff and hundreds of patients. And on my watch, I won't let anybody be injured.
What did you do during lockdown, Mr. Mazzaros?
I went back to my office to see the situation outside, hoping it would be reduced, hoping the temperature would be reduced outside. And I worked with CPS and law enforcement and the clinical team in terms of discharging the patient to CPS custody.
When you went to your office, which I believe you've indicated for us is at the northwest corner of the Boise Hospital, what did you observe from your office at that time?
My office is approximate to a fire escape, and I saw an individual trying to get into the fire door. I also saw individuals down by the cafeteria banging on the door and banging on the window trying to get into the hospital.
Was your impression they were trying to enter the hospital?
Yes, and they were armed.
So you've mentioned some other folks some other St. Luke's team members who were in incident command with you. Do you have an understanding of what they were doing during the lockdown?
They were rounding and also coordinating in terms of discharging the infant to CPS custody.
Let's move at this time to the discharge of the infant. It sounds like during lockdown you were still actively working with CPS on a safe discharge plan for the infant. Is that fair?
Yes.
And what did you do in light of the lockdown to continue to develop and execute on that plan?
We recognized with the disruption that was going on outside that it would be impossible for a safe discharge through normal means. So we worked in terms of a plan that we would have to do a distraction while at the same time having CPS wait to take custody in a discrete location.
You said there was a need for a distraction. What sort of distractions was St. Luke's considering, just at a high level?
We talked about having a helicopter fly onto the helipad, which is on top of the tower, and we also talked about an unmarked vehicle going to the emergency department.
Of those diversions you were considering, why did you pick one over the other?
The risk of gunfire directed at the helicopter.
And I take it that you decided not to go with that plan because
Correct.
of that. So there was an unmarked vehicle that was, where was it as far as the distraction was concerned?
It came to the emergency department and backed into the emergency department.
Was the diversion successful?
Yes.
Who was present during the discharge of the infant?
From the unit, I was, my chief nurse was, the 2 law enforcement officers were, and the director of the unit.
Walk us through, at a high level, what discharge of the infant looked like with that team that had been assembled to safely discharge him.
We secured elevators, gathered the infant's belongings, had him in a car seat, of which clinical leader took possession of the infant. Somebody pushed the cart that had the breast milk on it, and we walked with the 2 security officers to the elevators and then down to the basement of the hospital, and then through the infrastructure to the northwest parking garage, through an infrastructure tunnel.
Was Boise police with you while you were transporting the infant?
Yes, they were.
What was their impression about the risk of safely discharging the infant, if you recall?
I noticed it was high.
Did they have any specific concerns that they wanted your team to be aware of while you were moving through the hospital?
What was obvious to me is one of the officers went to help with grabbing a diaper bag, and the other officer said, "Keep your hands free."
What did you understand law enforcement to mean by that?
Be ready to pull your firearm.
Were you ultimately able to safely discharge the infant into the custody of the Department of Health and Welfare?
Yes.
And again, during all of this, the lockdown is still in place.
Correct.
Once the infant was safely discharged to the Department of Health and Welfare, what did you do next?
We went back to the command center and talked through in terms of how to get the crowd to dissipate. At that point in time, we worked with law enforcement in terms of having them share a message that the infant was no longer in the hospital custody. And he radioed officers that were outside the hospital dealing with the disruptors. And at that point in time, the message was relayed.
Did that message that the Boise Police Department relayed have an effect on the crowd outside?
Yes, it did.
And what was that effect?
It reduced in size.
But not completely?
Correct.
After you had returned to the Boise Hospital, did you also speak with the infant's care team?
Yes.
And why did you do that?
They were traumatized. They were impacted by this. They were fearful for their own safety based on the events that transpired.
Did they express any concerns relative to the doxing and some of the other issues you've raised earlier?
Yes, and we set up processes to monitor all the internet activity.
What time did you leave the Boise Hospital that night?
It was probably between 4 and 5 in the afternoon.
And is that when Incident Command was stood down that night?
Correct.
What did you do after you left the campus?
We left in a group. We were afraid to leave alone, and we walked out to our cars. And then personally, I made a decision around my own personal safety.
What was that decision?
To buy a firearm.
Have you ever owned a firearm before this?
I have not.
When the infant was discharged from St. Luke's, again around the afternoon of March 15th, did the threat to St. Luke's cease at that time?
No, it did not.
What additional threats or continued threats were continuing to be posed to St. Luke's and its operations?
The narrative had continued on the websites, and in addition, Mr. Bundy and Mr. Rodriguez continued this false narrative. We had seen call to arms from other groups, the Patriot Dogs, relative to ongoing disruption to our campus.
Through this present day, what ongoing operational effects has this still had on St. Luke's?
Well, we've maintained a more robust threat assessment team. We've maintained a lot more locked doors and tighter visitation parameters. We've done a lot more with our internal security team and threat assessment. We teach our staff situational awareness. We've worked with the witnesses that are involved in this case in terms of threat assessments on their own personal property, and supported security systems being put in place.
You earlier testified that there were some efforts to have the pediatric care team remain more anonymous. Are those protocols still in place?
Yes, they are.
Mr. Mazzaro, sometime after March 15th, when you'd had some time to reflect, did you reach out to anyone else who'd been involved in the infant's discharge to communicate your gratitude for their efforts that day?
I did. I reached out to the mayor regarding the over and above support that we had from the Boise Police Department, specifically the 2 officers that were in incident command.
And Mr. Mazzaro, may I ask you to turn to Exhibit 806 in your binder? Do you recognize that document?
I do.
And just broadly, what is it?
It's a recognition of the 2 officers that were in incident command, Officers Ransom and Jones, how they partnered with hospital leadership to ensure the safety of the care team and the individuals in the hospital that day, how they helped in terms of calming the crowd and dispelling the crowd outside.
And, Your Honor, Exhibit 806 was previously authenticated via the Aubrey-Lyon Declaration submitted as part of the first McCraney Declaration, and I would move that it is admitted and published to the jury.
Exhibit 806 is admitted and may be published.
Ms. Gambo, if you could zoom in on that second paragraph there. And Mr. Mazzaros, we just read that for the jury.
Secondly, this week would have been worse if not for the support of the Boise Police Department. In over 30 years of healthcare, I have never witnessed anything close to Tuesday, March 15, as the threat of violence directed towards healthcare workers increased during a hospital lockdown. As events unfolded, there was a tremendous show of support by the Boise Police Department. As we arranged a safe transition of the patient to CPS, officers Captain Matt Jones and Lieutenant Josiah Ransom partnered with hospital leadership above and beyond expectations. It was their leadership that supported a safe transition of the patient. Their confidence and calm presence decreased our stress levels. Additionally, their ability to peacefully engage with protesters reduced the risk and allowed hospital leadership to clear lockdown.
Mr. Mazzaros, you write in there, in over 30 years of healthcare, you had never witnessed anything close to Tuesday, March 15th. Could you comment a little more on what you meant by that when you wrote that to Mayor McLean?
I spent time in Washington, D.C., Silver Spring, Maryland, and I was in a hospital during 9/11, and we had to establish incident command for Pentagon disaster, the airliner that flew into the Pentagon. And you stop surgeries, you clear the runway, you make sure beds are available. That was easy compared to this. I had to manage through the Montgomery County sniper situation. That was violence that was not directed towards healthcare workers. This was just unbelievably a different scale, a different level. In both of those events, I've never had to lock down a hospital. Again, it's when you're not open to serve the community, that should be a concern for all of us.
Mr. Mazzaros, other than purchasing a firearm for the first time that you've shared with us here today, are there any other steps that you find yourself personally taking following March 15th that were a change in your regular behavior?
Healthcare is about service. It's about service to a community. And there's a lot of pride that historically has gone through it. And now I choose for anonymity. I think twice to tell people where I work and what I do. I don't wear my badge into the grocery store anymore. I don't wear it when I cross the street to the parking lot. It's just a different world out there.
And what's your concern that, not wearing your badge and being hesitant to tell people that you work? Why even now do you take those steps?
That narrative is still out there, and that threat of violence is still out there.
Mr. Mazzaros, it's been 15 or so months since that decision that you had to make to lock down St. Luke's on March 15th. With 15 months of reflection, have you at any point questioned that that was the right decision to make?
It was absolutely the right decision to make.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions for this witness.
May you be excused?
You may, Your Honor.
Thank you, sir. You are excused.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Lawyers may call our next witness.
Your Honor, we call Dr. James Souza.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this matter, nothing but the truth, the whole truth?
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, sir. Could you please state your full name and spell your last name for the record?
James Souza, MD, James Souza.
Very good. Counsel, you may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Souza, where are you employed?
At St. Luke's Health System.
And what is your role at St. Luke's Health System?
I serve as the Chief Physician Executive.
And can you explain what that role is to the jury?
I'm responsible to oversee the physician and provider enterprise.
And what do you mean when you say the provider enterprise?
Providers refer to nurse practitioners, physician assistants, for example.
And so, Doctor, when you count the number of individuals within the provider enterprise and the doctors, how many folks is that?
There are roughly 1,800 that are part of the St. Luke's Clinic, which is the employed and contracted group, and then there are a couple of thousand more that are independent medical staff members.
So, in effect, are you in charge of managing those individuals?
That's correct.
And also assuring that they have what they need to perform their duties?
That's correct.
Were you in that role during March of 2022?
Yes, I was in my current role in March of 22.
And so you were in that role during the disruptions that we've been talking about?
Yes, I was.
Doctor, before we get into that in too much detail, I'd like to just take a step back and get a little bit better understanding of your background, if we could.
Okay.
So, Doctor, when did you graduate from medical school?
In 1992,
And where did you graduate from?
the University of Washington.
And after you completed your work there, where did you attend your residency?
At the University of Washington affiliated hospitals.
And what was your first employment after that?
I completed fellowship after my residency to gain my specialty, and my first employment after that was at the Boise VA Medical Center.
And that specialty that you had the fellowship in, what is that specialty?
Pulmonary disease and critical care medicine.
And then I take it that after that fellowship you came to the Boise VA?
I did.
And what drew you to the Boise VA?
It was an academic institution, and I had an opportunity to be a clinician teacher, and at that time I thought that's what I wanted to do.
How long were you at the Boise VA?
1 year.
Where'd you go after that?
Into private practice of pulmonary and critical care medicine.
And how long were you in private practice?
For 11 years until I became an employee of St. Luke's Health System.
And so about when was that you joined St. Luke's?
2010.
2010. And what was it that drew you to St. Luke's, Doctor?
I was drawn by their compelling mission and vision for service to the community and for taking steps to change healthcare delivery.
And what was your first role at St. Luke's?
I led the pulmonary and critical care group that was employed by St. Luke's between 2010 and 2012.
And the next step in your career at St. Luke's?
I took a role as vice president for medical affairs in the Boise region.
And what did those duties entail?
I was a liaison, an administrative liaison between the healthcare administration and the organized medical staff, those individuals with medical staff privileges.
And can you give the jury an overview of your progression from that stage to the role you're currently in?
Yes, in 2017, I took on the role of chief medical officer for the health system. And the title of that role was changed subsequently to Chief Physician Executive.
And do you also continue to care for patients?
I do.
And how do you do that? In what role? Or how do you perform that function?
I see ambulatory patients in an outpatient pulmonary disease clinic, and I see inpatients in the Boise intensive care units, adult intensive care units.
Thank you for that background, Doctor. If we could move to the events of March 2022, if we could.
Okay.
When did you first learn that there was a disruption involving Mr. Bundy?
It would have been either sometime on the 12th, the 13th at the latest of March.
Okay. And how were you made aware of that?
It would have been through text messages and emails.
And text messages and emails from what sources?
From Incident Command and from St. Luke's Health System leadership.
So we've heard about Incident Command at this point. Given your position at the hospital, did you have a role within Incident Command?
I didn't have a role at the local Incident Command. I have a system leadership role, and my role there would have been to stay apprised of the situation, be aware of the issues that were happening, and be prepared to step in, lend additional support if needed, especially to those individuals that were my direct reports, like Dr. Frank Johnson, the Chief Medical Officer.
So in that role of receiving information at the system level, can you give the jury a sense of what you were hearing, what was being relayed to you during that period of, let's say, March 12th up to the 14th before the lockdown occurred?
I was aware that we were caring for an infant that had been taken into custody by law enforcement and CPS, and I was aware that a false narrative had been created about our care for that infant and that a group of disruptors was assembling outside of our Boise facility.
Okay. And as you were hearing this, I mean, can you share with us what your reaction and what, if any, steps you were taking in your role?
My reaction was that I was shocked. Steps I was taking were to reach out to support those direct reports that I worked with, as well as any individuals I thought might be involved to provide my support.
You said you were shocked, Doctor. Can you explain what you mean by that in this context?
This event violated a societal norm.
What do you mean by that, Doctor?
Hospitals are sacred places. The word itself, hospital, comes from the Latin hospitium, which speaks to this ancient human expectation about providing shelter, support, and care to strangers. Hospitals in our society are special places where that occurs. In fact, there's even federal law that requires that it would be so if we were to forget our obligation, such that we see anybody, regardless of ability to pay. And, a hospital and the provision of health care is well known by society everywhere to be special. This is why we're profoundly offended when we hear about a hospital being bombed in a war zone. This is why there's a well-known expectation that if you paint a red cross on the side of a white truck, or you put a red cross on top of a building, even in a war zone, that is not to be touched. It's a sacred spot. It's a place where vulnerable people come and where people care for those vulnerable people.
So, Doctor, in that context, I mean, what was your concern regarding those that were in your charge, in effect, the providers and the doctors?
I had many concerns. Certainly, I was concerned about their personal safety. I was concerned about how they were going to be carrying out their duties as physicians and providers, providing care. And because of that, I was concerned about the patients they would be caring for.
And I understand that you're a very high, in effect, point in the leadership. What steps were you taking, if any, to ensure that those below you were addressing the concerns you just identified?
Thank you. I was staying in close communication with the leaders that were closer to the action to understand what actions they were taking, what was actually happening, and how, whether, if system resources were needed.
So, Doctor, we've heard about a couple of things that were occurring during that period as far as disruptions to the hospital. If I could, I'd like to get an understanding from you as to how those might affect patient care. So if I could, we've heard about phone disruptions.
Yes.
Can you explain to us what types of phone disruptions were occurring during this period?
Our phone lines got flooded by calls, and that's a particularly reckless action relative to a healthcare delivery system.
And when you say flooded, can you explain a little bit more what you mean by that?
There had been a direction to, call in, disrupt their phone lines, stop their operations. So I don't have access to the numbers. I just know that we were inundated with calls.
And at some point, did that overload or frustrate your phone systems from being able to function?
Yes.
And can you explain, within the context of providing care, how that phone system that we're talking about affects care and it's used for the hospital for care?
Absolutely. Students of patient safety in healthcare know well that the most common cause of medical errors and safety errors for patients has to do with breakdowns in communication. Number one cause. And, our transfer center is managing 500 to 600 calls per day. Those are not all from internal sources. Some of those do involve transfers from outlying St. Luke's facilities to try to move patients to the Boise campus, but many come from other hospitals. In addition, we see 8,000 ambulatory visits per day. Many of those ambulatory visits involve communication with patients, communication about things like chemotherapy, about radiotherapy, about their upcoming surgery. All of that was disrupted.
Doctor, you'd mentioned in that context that some of these calls are calls with other hospitals. What is the significance for, as far as care goes, of those calls between St. Luke's and other hospitals?
Yes. So the Boise Hospital in particular is special. It is our tertiary care center, and I could explain that, but essentially it's a resource for the entire healthcare delivery system across southwest Idaho to bring the most ill, most complex patients needing special types of surgery only offered there, special types of expert consultation and teams of care only offered there.
And that's in part what was shut down?
Yes.
You'd also mentioned calls between patients and the hospital, correct?
Yes.
Can you give us a sense of just the significance of those type of calls for care?
Well, as you all could potentially imagine, you have an upcoming visit with a physician. Maybe something has changed. You need your clinical team to know about that before. You're making calls in advance to convey that information. Maybe you have new information that requires that a procedure be moved up. You can't do that.
Doctor, we also heard testimony just a short while ago about the hospital needed to go on divert.
Yes.
Can you explain to the jury what that means in the context of providing care?
Yes. Divert means that you feel your emergency department is no longer safe to be receiving patients, and so you put out a message to EMS and others that you're closed for any new patients.
And have you taken a look at what occurred as far as diversions in this particular case as it relates to that lockdown on March 15th?
I have.
Can you give the jury a sense of the type of some examples of the medical situations, again, without revealing any patient names, the types of situations that were diverted?
I can. The three that are most shocking were an elderly stroke patient, young mother in preterm labor with twins at 24 weeks gestation, and then a 22-month-old child.
So what's the significance of a stroke patient being diverted?
It's very significant because stroke is a time-sensitive emergency. Time-sensitive means literally that minutes count. It's time-sensitive because the key decision to be made in the care of a stroke patient is whether or not that patient is a candidate to try to have an artery reopened, to reestablish blood flow to the part of the brain that they're at risk for losing. And it's a well-known clinical adage that time is brain.
You'd mentioned also a woman who was pregnant, correct?
Yes.
What's the significance of that situation being diverted?
So this young mom with twin gestation, she was 29, and the twins were at 24 weeks gestation. What these three humans need: first of all, mom needs a maternal fetal medicine team. These are doctors and the people who work with those doctors that are specially trained to manage high-risk pregnancy complications. What those two unborn children need is a children's hospital with a NICU ready to try to save their lives because they are literally at 24 weeks at the limit of viability. If they were at 23 weeks, we couldn't try to save them, but at 24, there's an opportunity to try to save them.
And is there any particular significance of that condition being diverted from St. Luke's?
Yes, there's not another facility in the region that has the same level of that integration, that expertise, the maternal fetal medicine part of a children's hospital that has a NICU.
You'd mentioned a third instance. Can you talk to the jury about that?
Yes, there was a 22-month-old child that was acutely and critically ill that needed to be transferred to our children's hospital, and the initial planning was to move them to our pediatric intensive care unit. They were diverted.
In addition to those diversions during the lockdown, you heard Mr. Maceros talk about St. Luke's not being used by Life Flight and other sources during that week. Is that also significant?
It is.
And why is that?
It comes back to what you heard from Mr. Maceros regarding our obligation to the community. We are, especially that Boise campus, with this higher level of care, expertise, procedures that can't be performed elsewhere. Literally, if we're not open and people don't feel safe coming there, those patients need to go far away. And when it becomes time sensitive, that becomes a threat to life.
We'd also heard about crowds during that week, including on the 15th. Did those crowds and their actions have an effect on health care during that week?
Yes.
In what way?
Let me count off a few. Impacted the well-being of the people providing the care. Impacted the well-being of the patients receiving the care, and impacted the way in which families would or would not be able to visit their loved ones.
I'd like to ask you if you could provide the jury a little bit more detail about that. You'd mentioned one was impacted the well-being of those providing the care. What do you mean by that?
Just as this was shocking to me to see a sacred space violated like this, an armed mob, so too the people working in the building felt the same sort of shock. In addition to that, they now had another thing occupying their mind, the safety of the patients they were caring for. If someone comes in with a weapon, where will I move my patient to keep them safe, and even their own safety?
You'd also mentioned the well-being of the patients. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yes. So I think patients were aware, some of them were aware of what was happening outside, and in a place of healing, when patients are managing, all of the stresses of an acute illness, wondering whether or not they're going to be safe is not something you want to add to the situation. Probably more profound than that, however, is the distraction that this creates for the people providing the care. To have to be thinking about where their patient might be safe or whether they might be safe, when you think about the complex tasks that they have to manage, that is an acute threat to patient safety.
And what about, you'd mentioned an additional category, the well-being of the patient's family or loved one?
Yeah. The probably least negative impact of that is that it erodes the overall experience of care. It's important for patients to be able to be supported by their families when they're acutely ill. I think maybe a more nefarious or I guess insidious concern is that this false narrative that the hospital is not a safe place might actually be believed by some individuals, and that they might delay their care. But in the moment, in the event, the absence of family being able to be at the bedside is a direct threat to patient safety. Many of our patients are confused, and they're delirious, or they're unable to provide historical information that we count on the family for, if the phones are working. And being absent that sort of information is a threat to the quality of care.
And doctor, we've heard about the lockdown, but were you also receiving reports that visits from family members were being canceled that entire work week?
Yes.
Doctor, we talked about, let me ask you about this. You also heard Mr. Massaros talk about his own personal experience of keeping his badge and hidden and some of those things. Out of the thousands of providers that you're responsible for, have you heard similar messages?
Yes.
And what's your concern there?
It's this ongoing fear that what happened will not have accountability attached to it, and that somehow the message that this was okay, despite hospitals being sacred places, that somehow the message is maybe this is okay.
Dr. Souza, you should have a binder up there. And doctor, do you also have a binder for?
I do.
Doctor, would you turn to a document that we previously marked as Exhibit 58?
I have it.
And can you identify that? And just identify it for the record in general.
It's an email that I sent to Chris Roth.
And the date?
March 17th.
And does that relate to communications you and Mr. Roth had during that time frame?
It does.
And, Your Honor, this has also been authenticated through the McCraney First and Aubrey Lyons declaration. We would like to enter it, Your Honor, ask for it to be admitted to evidence, in particular as it relates to Dr. Souza's reaction from that last exchange with Mr. Roth.
Hasn't this already been admitted, Mr. Roth's email? I'm not sure what this adds.
This, Your Honor, I believe the one previous did not include that last exchange, unless I'm mistaken, at the top.
Exhibit 58's admitted and may be published.
And Dr. Souza, as the court has mentioned, we've heard previously from Mr. Roth regarding the communication he sent out on March 17th, 2022. My question to you is, do you typically send that type of a communication as is reflected there in your email of March 17th at 4:59 p.m.?
No, I do not.
And what did you write there, if you could read that for the jury?
It was short. It just says, "This is excellent, Chris."
And why was it significant to you to do this when Apparently, you don't typically do such a thing.
Chris is not the kind of leader that needs affirmations. I generally don't send out email affirmations. But this was a moment of acute crisis for the healthcare system. There was a lot of pain and suffering, fear, worry happening. And frankly, I believed that the message was excellent and only could have been given by our most senior leader.
And then if you look at the top, Mr. Roth responded to you, is that correct?
That's correct.
Would you read Mr. Roth's response for the jury?
Thank you. Team effort for sure. This has been the most stressful week of my career. I'm so thankful for an incredible team who listens and communicates and informs the actions we need to take.
And have you worked with Mr. Ross for a long time?
Yes.
How many years?
13.
What was your reaction when you read that from Mr. Roth?
It clarified how much stress that he was under.
Are you proud of the job that Mr. Roth did during this entire event?
Very much so.
What about the doctors, nurses, other providers that you oversee?
Absolutely.
And do you have an understanding that St. Luke's and the doctors that you oversee continue to be caught up and attacked in a false narrative from the defendants?
I do.
You mentioned accountability. Do you think that, from your perspective, in your role, is accountability here for the defendants significant?
It should be.
Why is that?
Because at a moment in time when the defendants were claiming that their actions were in the name of safety for a small child, they violated the safety of hundreds of patients that were hospitalized in the Boise hospital, their families, all of the people working there, the thousands of people that needed to talk with us, speak with us on those days. And the idea that, an armed mob could hijack that sacred resource that we all count on, it requires an answer.
No further questions, Your Honor.
May this witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you, Doctor. You are excused. Plaintiffs may call their next witness.
Please call Dr. Frank Johnson, Your Honor.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony about this matter not before the court should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please just sit close enough and speak clearly to the mic, please. Thank you.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Please state your full name and spell your last name for the record.
Certainly. Frank Johnson, Johnson.
Very good. Counsel, you may inquire.
Dr. Johnson, good morning.
Good morning.
Dr. Johnson, let's start this morning by me asking, who is your current employer?
I work for St. Luke's Health System.
And how long have you been employed with St. Luke's?
24 years.
And what is your current role at St. Luke's?
I'm the Chief Medical Officer for the Boise, Elmore, and McCall hospitals.
And what are your kind of chief duties in your role for those hospitals?
As a chief medical officer, I am accountable, along with my colleague Dennis Massaros, who you heard from earlier. I'm accountable for the quality, safety, and patient experience of the medical care provided at those hospitals.
And sounds like you have 3 hospitals under your jurisdiction that you're responsible for in that way. Where is your office located, or do you travel between all 3 locations?
I'll do a little bit of traveling, but my main office is in the Boise Hospital. That's the biggest hospital. That's where most of my work occurs.
And in addition to those administrative duties you've just highlighted for us, do you still have an active medical practice?
I do.
And could you tell us about that?
I'm an internal medicine doctor. I have a primary care clinic.
And could you take us through your education that led up to your medical degree?
Certainly. I graduated from Pacific Lutheran University for my undergraduate degree. I completed medical school at the University of Washington, and I completed a residency in internal medicine through the University of Washington and also at the Boise VA Hospital.
And was it after your work at the VA hospital that you came to St. Luke's?
Yes, I did.
And how long have you been in that chief medical officer role that you described for us earlier?
5 years.
So I take it you were the chief medical officer in March of last year?
Yes, I was.
And when and how did you have occasion in your role as the chief medical officer to learn about the disruptions that were occurring at the Boise hospital?
I first learned about those on a Sunday evening. That would have been March 13th.
And did you report to the Boise hospital that next morning?
Yes, I did.
And what did you do upon arriving at the Boise hospital that morning?
First thing was to check in with our incident command team, my colleagues who were helping to coordinate the response to the events that were occurring.
And around what time was that?
7 o'clock.
And what role did you serve in the incident command structure?
I was the medical officer in the incident command structure.
And how was that important given the role of why incident command was stood up, if you can help us understand that?
Certainly. Well, this was a clinical incident. There was certainly need to communicate and coordinate clinical care with the multiple people involved. And so my responsibility was to help coordinate those efforts with the other actions that our incident command team was taking.
What do you remember, if anything, about arriving at the hospital that morning?
There was a handful of protesters outside even at 7 o'clock in the morning, a small group.
And what were you doing in your role that morning that you've described for us as the chief medical officer for incident command?
Well, we needed to make sure that the care of the infant was being handled appropriately and that safe care was being provided by our team. That required support for our teams who were providing that care and some assurance that in spite of the disruptions that were occurring, we continued to provide safe care for not only that infant but for the other patients in our hospital.
And so what actions did you take to go and ensure that that safe care was being provided?
I rounded.
And where did you round?
That morning rounded on the pediatric unit.
And who did you talk to when you got to the pediatric unit, just using not their names, but their role at the hospital?
Certainly. I spoke with some of the care team members, some of the nurses, some of the other care team members of the rest of the unit, checked on their well-being, checked on their stress levels, checked on how they were handling the situation, and offered the support that I could to help them do their duties in a tough situation.
Did you also have an occasion at that point to check in on the overall status and care of the infant?
I did.
And what was your understanding of his condition at that time?
The infant was making good progress. He was gaining weight, tolerating tube feeds, and had improvement in his laboratory findings.
And again, this is the Monday, March 14th, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Were you asked to take on any other duties in your role as the chief medical officer on the incident command team that morning?
I was. The care team was having concerns, appropriate concerns for their safety and their ability to communicate with the family. I offered and accepted the role of being the family communicator to help that care team do their job better.
So to be clear, you took on the role of communicating clinical updates to the infant's parents. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And when did you have occasion to make one of those reports to the parents that day?
Yeah, the first report was following their visit with the infant on the afternoon of Monday the 14th.
And did you speak with them in person during that visit?
Yes, I did.
And what was your overall impression of how that conversation went?
My overall impression was that it went well. They gave the impression that they were thankful that their infant was improving. We answered their questions. They gave all appearances that they were satisfied with the care that was being provided. Grateful that their child was improving.
Dr. Johnson, I want to back up a little bit to when you said you were rounding earlier that day on the pediatrics unit. Where is the pediatrics unit located at St. Luke's Boise's Hospital?
It's on the 4th floor.
And when we were on the 4th floor, talk to the care team that you've described for us, were you able to see the disruptions outside from that 4th floor?
Yes, I was.
And what did you observe about the disruptions at that time?
Well, there were a lot of disruptors, protesters, standing outside on the sidewalks. Lots of signs, lots of noise, lots of chaos. We had a lot of families at windows looking out. Windows of the pediatric unit look right out over that area. Families and staff appropriately concerned, seeing the chaos that was developing.
When you looked out the windows of the pediatric unit that morning, what was your reaction to seeing those disruptors down there?
The first reaction, I was sad. I was sad for our patients. I was sad for our care team. I frankly was sad for the people who had been misled and were out there disrupting safe and appropriate care. I knew what was happening with the care of the infant, and it was clear that they were being misled.
Did you have any concerns for the safety of your staff as you looked out over that group?
Yes, I did.
And was there anything about what you observed about the protesters or disruptors at that time that elevated your safety concerns?
The volume of the protests, the evident anger and threat. There were firearms. You could see sidearms.
When you were on that pediatrics floor on Monday, did you have any interactions with patients, or I guess it'd be the parents of patients who were seeking care for their children that day?
Yes, I did.
And do you recall any of those interactions specifically?
Yes. Up on the pediatric floor, parents appropriately concerned about the care that would be given to their children who were there in the hospital. Fear, not knowing what was going to happen, how this might escalate.
What did you do, if anything, to alleviate those concerns?
Well, I worked throughout the course of the incident command to try and reflect the things we were doing to maintain safety to the best of our ability, to reflect the fact that we had the support of the Boise Police Department, fantastic support, and that we were taking appropriate steps to keep all of our patients, all of our staff safe, and that we would continue to provide the best care. Confidence in our team. We have a fantastic group of caregivers, fantastic group of, team members caring for those patients who were inspiring in their ability to continue to provide care in that setting. So reflecting my personal confidence, which I think is evident in the care that was being provided by those teams, those are the efforts I was taking.
In addition to be, as you said, I think appropriately concerned for the safety of their children who were admitted to the pediatrics unit, did you have any impression that they were concerned about the safety of the healthcare providers providing that care to their children?
Yes.
And was that how was that expressed to you, or how did you come to that understanding?
Well, there were family members who were angry that threats were being made against the care team who was providing great care for their kids. And when you have a child in the hospital, parents have a strong connection to their care team. I mean, you're so grateful when nurses and doctors are caring for your ill child that you become pretty defensive for the well-being of that care team. And absolutely, family members were angry. And if there was anything good, it was to see the gratitude that they had for the care team.
I want to take us back to this time about your communication with the infant's parents. I believe you said it was during the afternoon of March 14th. Am I correct about that?
Yes, that's correct.
And again, your impression was that conversation had gone well. Is that fair?
It was.
Did they express any concerns at that time about the infant's quality of care, or any specific concerns that they had about what St. Luke's was providing him in terms of his actual medical treatment?
I mean, in terms of actual medical treatment, they wanted to make sure that their infant could still have access to breast milk, which he was, that he was not being immunized, which he wasn't, and that he was improving.
And again, at that time, was the infant's health improving?
It was.
Making reasonable strides towards discharge?
Absolutely.
Dr. Johnson, were you aware that on the evening of March 14th at around 6 o'clock, Diego Rodriguez held a press conference outside of St. Luke's specifically to address what he termed the infant's care at St. Luke's?
I was not at the time.
Have you subsequently had a chance to review that video?
Yes, I have.
And Your Honor, at this time I'd like to admit several clips from Exhibit 269, which was authenticated via the first McCraney declaration that was submitted on June 28th at paragraph 30. There are 4 clips, and the timestamps of those clips are in the binder that was provided there to Your Honor. I'm happy to read them into the record if you would like.
I think it's probably best that they be read into the record. So they're all from the one video, but 4 different clips?
Correct, Your Honor. And what I'd like to do is admit them all at this time so I can walk Dr. Johnson through them and get his reaction to each clip.
All right. Just make a record of the clip times for A, B, C, and D.
Yes, Your Honor. So A is clip time 2 minutes 15 seconds to 3 minutes 24 seconds. B is 5 minutes 34 seconds to 6 minutes and 2 seconds. Exhibit C is 6 minutes 28 seconds to 6 minutes 44 seconds. And Exhibit D is 7 minutes 10 seconds to 7 minutes and 44 seconds.
All right. And Exhibit 269, the clips A, B, C, and D are admitted and may be published.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Gamboa, if we could pull up the first clip.
Levi and Marissa were able last night to enter into this building for 2 hours, escorted by Idaho State police officers and a social worker to see baby Cyrus. It was definitely and initially a very positive development. There's nothing that my family wants more, nothing my daughter wants more than to be with her son. But on the same token, it was an incredibly discouraging moment because baby Cyrus's health is rapidly deteriorating. From the moment he was taken, he was very healthy, he was strong, he was not malnourished. There were not a team of medical doctors who determined that he was malnourished. If that is so, someone get that for me. Let them show us that documentation. That is a full-fledged lie. Anybody who's told you that there was a team of medical personnel who determined that baby Cyrus, thank you, brother, was malnourished is a flat lie. If so, show us that documentation. Provide it. We've asked for it. It does not exist. We've asked multiple people for it. It simply does not exist.
Dr. Johnson, just initially, what's your reaction to seeing that video of Mr. Rodriguez outside of St. Luke's that night?
It's just, it's appalling. That is, it's all complete fabrication. It is not true. And we had provided information to the family throughout the course of the infant's hospitalization that directly refutes what he was just reporting. It's just appalling.
So breaking down some of the claims made by Mr. Rodriguez in that video, you had met with the parents earlier that afternoon, correct?
Yes, I had.
Did the infant's parents raise any concerns that he was, to use Mr. Rodriguez's own words, rapidly deteriorating?
Not during that visit.
Is there any way that the parents could have understood from anything communicated to them by you at that time that that was the infant's condition?
No.
Mr. Rodriguez also claims, and I quote, that the infant was not malnourished and that this was a full-fledged lie and that they had been asking for documentation and it did not exist. What's your reaction to that?
There was good documentation that the infant was malnourished. His body weight was less than 1% for an infant of his age, less than the first percentile, tiny. There was good documentation that during his previous hospitalization, he had gained weight with appropriate nutrition and came back underweight, dehydrated, and in worse condition. There was good documentation that he'd been gaining weight and tolerating the nutrition and fluids that were being given him and was making great progress. Laboratory tests improved. Yeah, there was really good documentation, and we were working to get that documentation to the family.
On that claim about documentation, were you involved in providing medical records to the parents when and if those records were requested by them?
Yes, I was.
And just generally, if a patient makes a request to St. Luke's for medical records, about how long kind of does that process normally take?
Typically, it's a day or two. You make the request, and you can come back in a day or two to get those records.
And what's your understanding about how quickly these medical records were provided to the infant's parents when they did, in fact, request them?
We asked a person to stay late and process this as quickly as possible. I think it was 4, maybe 6 hours was the turnaround.
Ms. Gambo, if you could now pull up clip 269B.
Yes, you read for her and for my son-in-law. Recognize him, but just laid there like a dead zombie. In 2 days. That's the care that these animals are saying that he has to have by force at the point of a gun, mind you. Because if you try to prevent the state from taking your child, they kill you with immunity.
Dr. Johnson, again, what's your reaction to seeing that statement that was made by Mr. Rodriguez that evening?
I'm angry. My colleagues, the nursing staff, the team's working hard to be described as animals. I can't fathom why he would choose to use that type of language. And knowing the concern and the dedication that our team provided during this really tough situation, and to have that kind of language being used is it just makes me angry.
Ms. Gambo, if we could move now to 269C.
We're also concerned they swore up and down that they would not give baby Cyrus any vaccines, any jabs, any medical treatment without their prior authorization. But they've been lying over and over and over again, and we don't know what to trust them.
Dr. Johnson, I think you've already commented on this, but just because this has been such a theme of the defendants, could you comment definitively on whether or not the infant was vaccinated at all during his admittance at St. Luke's?
No vaccinations were administered during his stay at St. Luke's.
And I heard in there another allegation about providing medical treatment without the parent's authorization. Could you provide your comments on that?
Certainly. In spite of the fact that the infant was under the custody of Child Protective Services, the parents remained and maintained decision-making authority, and we continued to seek consent and approval for any treatment that was provided and secured that from the parents.
Ms. Gambo, if we could now play 269D.
So we're here today to have this press conference to change the false narrative that the state always wants to use to protect itself, that they're here trying to protect baby Cyrus. That is not protection, that is deterioration. What you saw right there, and what has been going on over this weekend, is harm, physical harm. This hospital, law enforcement, and everybody, Child Protective Services, are harming baby Cyrus. They are not helping him, and their actions declare it to be so.
Again, Dr. Johnson, what's your reaction to seeing those allegations thrown towards your colleagues?
It's disgust and anger. Our team has a strong commitment to provide care to everyone who comes to St. Luke's and to do that under the best of their ability. I can't fathom what motivation Mr. Rodriguez had for making those comments. It certainly wasn't to improve the care of his grandchild, because he knew the information well, at least his the parents of the infant knew, and he knew better, and that those types of statements, those types of actions, are not rooted in trying to help improve care.
So, Dr. Johnson, I want to move now to March 15th. Did you again report to work the morning of March 15th?
Yes, I did.
And what did you do upon arriving the morning of March 15th to the Boise Hospital?
Started 7 o'clock, check-in with Incident Command.
And what were the priorities of Incident Command that day, if you recall?
Priorities were safe care for our patients, safety for our staff.
And at that time, in your role as the Chief Medical Officer serving in Incident Command, were you providing updates on the status of the infant's care?
Yes, I was.
And what was the status of the infant's condition at that time?
On the morning of the 15th, he continued to improve. Weight was going up, tolerating feeds, and had met criteria for discharge from the hospital.
And Dr. Johnson, this has come up again and again in this case, but I want to be clear about something and could use your assistance with it, which is that being stable or ready for discharge, what does that mean medically?
It depends on the reason for admission, but typically in a case like this, a malnourished, dehydrated infant, you want to make sure that their laboratory tests have stabilized. They had. Want to make sure that the infant is gaining weight. He was. Want to make sure that the infant is tolerating nutrition so that that weight gain can continue. He was. And you want a safe plan for follow-up and for management of that problem after discharge. And so that was the final thing that we were working on.
And you just said there, I think, that there would be follow-up, and I just want to be clear. Just because the infant was medically stable for discharge, that doesn't mean, correct me if I'm wrong, that he, the issue had resolved. Is that fair?
Right. He was still going to require care, still going to require some intensive monitoring and treatment to ensure that his weight continued to improve and that he continued to thrive in a much better way. And that was going to take some added work following discharge.
And that work was now appropriate, I think, as I understand it, to be completed in an outpatient versus inpatient setting. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Dr. Johnson, were you involved in conversations about how to safely discharge the infant?
Yes, I was.
And were those conversations ongoing and developing during the morning of March 15th?
Yes, they were.
Did you have an opportunity that morning to provide an update to the infant's parents?
I did.
And what do you recall about that conversation?
It was a telephone call that morning. It was not in person. And we again described the improvements that the infant had made over the subsequent evening and the morning, the continued weight gain, the tolerance of the feedings that were being administered.
And again, what was your impression about their, when they heard this information, what was their sort of reaction generally?
In the telephone call, my recollection is that they were grateful that their child was improving.
Was the Department of Health and Welfare involved in the conversations about the infant's safe discharge?
Yes, they were.
Was anyone else, to your recollection, involved in those conversations?
The care team, of course. I was not providing direct care. I was helping to support the care team. So we ensured that they were confident and comfortable in the ability to safely discharge the infant.
What do you remember about the situation outside of the hospital and how it was developing over the course of March 15th as you're planning to safely discharge the infant?
The crowds were building, the volume was going up, the temperature was definitely rising, and we could see more and more protesters, disruptors surrounding the hospital. It was getting increasingly tense.
Did you personally have occasion to observe what you just described as the protesters sort of encircling the hospital?
I did. I continued to round during the course of the day and could see them outside many patient windows. Outside of my office, could look out the window, see protesters looking in windows. Yes.
To be clear, you saw some of the crowd trying to look in the windows of your office?
Yes.
And what was your impression about why they were engaging in that kind of behavior?
The impression was that with the improvements, it was anticipated that the infant might be discharged. And so my impression is that they were going to take the infant, that they were trying to monitor the exits, make sure that if the infant was discharged, that they could rescue the infant.
Were you present in Incident Command when the decision was made to call the code lockdown?
I was.
What do you remember about that moment?
I remember our chief of security making the statement as the crowds were increasing, as the police were needing to be even more vigilant and active to protect the entrances. I recall our chief of security saying, "I can't keep our people safe."
Is that something you'd ever thought you'd hear Abby say?
No.
Counsel, I'm not sure how much more you have.
I imagine I have 10 to 15 more minutes, Your Honor.
All right, then we're going to take our morning break, ladies and gentlemen, 15 minutes, and then we'll come back and continue with this witness. Over the break, make sure there's no deliberations and heed the admonitions of the court previously given.
All right.
Thank you. Please be seated. Did anything happen over the recess to affect your qualifications? Seeing none, the witness remains subject to the oath previously taken. You may continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Johnson, before the break, you were describing the moment you knew that St. Luke's Boise's hospital would go into lockdown. Do you recall that testimony?
Yes, I do.
And as I recall, it was a statement from your security officer, Abby. And could you contextualize for us a little bit? The jury hasn't met Abby yet. Why that statement from Abby had the effect that it had on you that day?
Our head of security comes with a long background in hospital and other security. He came from Houston, where he had a lot of experience with big cities, lots of issues. He is a confident and talented, intelligent security officer who knows the ins and outs of maintaining safety. For him to make that statement was terrifying.
Dr. Johnson, once you had heard that the decision had been made and the facility would go into lockdown, what was the first thing you remember doing?
First thing I did was call my boss, Dr. Souza.
And why was that the very first thing you did?
Well, I needed to make sure that he, as the system leader for our physicians and providers, knew the gravity of the situation, and this really unprecedented action was occurring.
Could you help us understand what you mean when you just said this unprecedented action?
We've never gone on lockdown. This was our first time.
Was there anything else about the situation St. Luke's was facing in that moment that you also found to be unprecedented?
The threats, the threat of individuals storming the hospital, coming in armed to take away a patient, threaten our staff. That was unprecedented as well.
You said that was the very first thing you did. What was the second thing you remember doing?
Second thing was to go round on our hospital units.
And where did you go first?
First place was the emergency department.
What did you do upon arriving at the emergency department?
The first thing I did was go to the waiting room of the emergency department.
And what did you see when you arrived there?
The waiting room at our emergency department has windows that face right outside ambulance bay entrance. So right outside those windows was a line of Boise police officers, backs to the windows, facing the mob, and you could see the angry mob on the other side of the police line.
Could you hear what was going on as well?
You could hear the chaos for sure.
What was happening? I understand that's what was outside of the waiting room. What was happening inside the waiting room that you observed at that time?
We had patients and families in the waiting room of the emergency department, either waiting to go back and receive care or waiting for their family members who were back getting care in the emergency department.
Did you speak to any of those waiting families?
I did. There was fear there, and yes, I spoke with them.
What was your objective in speaking to those patients waiting there in the emergency department waiting room?
I was hoping to provide some degree of reassurance, some updates on the nature of the situation, and help them understand that we were going to continue to provide the best care we could for them and their families.
As you moved around the waiting room talking to these families, what was your impression about how they were feeling in that moment?
There was fear there.
And how did you perceive that there was fear there?
One family in particular was a father of two children, and he was clutching his children close and tight, eyes as big as saucers.
After you rounded on the patients in the emergency department waiting room, where did you go next?
Next, I went back into the emergency department itself to speak with staff.
And help us understand what those conversations were like.
First, I wanted to reassure people that we did not have an active shooter situation We hadn't called a code lockdown before, and I knew that people would make assumptions that there was a shooter.
Were you concerned at that time that the situation could become an active shooter situation, however?
We were.
After you spoke to those providers in the emergency department, where did you go next?
Next, I went to the pediatric unit,
And remind us where that's located.
4th floor.
What did you do once you got to the pediatric unit?
Call together nurses, care team members who were available to provide an update and information.
And what was the updated information you were able to provide at that time?
Yeah, the update was crowds are escalating, increasing. The temperature is rising between those crowds, and we needed to go on lockdown to allow Boise Police Department to do their job, de-escalate the situation as best they could, maintain the safety of our teams and our patients.
You said that you were able to speak with providers who were available. What were the providers who weren't available doing at this time?
They were taking care of patients.
And Dr. Johnson, where did you go next after visiting the pediatric floor?
Next, I went to the labor and delivery floor.
And where is that in the hospital?
That's on the 2nd floor.
And do you remember any particular conversations or communications you were attempting to make when you visited that floor?
Yeah, that was the same process. Pull the staff together, provide some updates.
Did you have occasion while you were on the labor and delivery floor to speak to any patients?
I did.
Do you remember any conversations in particular?
Well, that labor and delivery floor, many of the patient windows look out over where the protesters were and were being separated from the entrances by the police. That one room, a woman in labor and her husband partner was there.
Were they scared?
Yes, they were.
Did you continue to round during the duration of the lockdown?
I did.
And as you recall, when did the lockdown end?
When the infant was ultimately discharged.
Dr. Johnson, I think you may have already answered this question, but had you ever been through anything like this at St. Luke's before?
Never.
Had you been through anything like this before in your previous employment or work as a physician?
Never.
Dr. Johnson, did you at any time in working with the infant's care team ever doubt that he needed to be admitted to the Boise Hospital?
I had no doubt that he needed to be admitted.
And why is that?
He was clearly malnourished, dehydrated, and needed care in an inpatient setting to stabilize.
You were there that day of the lockdown.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any doubts that it was the right call for the hospital to go into lockdown when it did that day on March 15th?
No, I have no doubts that was a needed action at the time.
Dr. Johnson, are you familiar with the narrative that the defendants, Mr. Bundy, Mr. Rodriguez, and their groups continue to push that because of everything they did, everything you've described to us today, that is the reason why the infant was discharged from St. Luke's?
I've heard that narrative, yes.
What's your response to that narrative?
That is completely untrue. The care team monitored closely what was happening with the infant, and we knew what the criteria was for safe discharge, and that involved health and safety of the infant. And when the infant met those criteria, it was appropriate to discharge. It wasn't any sooner than what was possible. It wasn't any later. It was at the right time based on the clinical condition of that infant.
Dr. Johnson, in your role as the Chief Medical Officer for the St. Luke's Boise Hospital, how would you characterize, or have you observed any longer-term effects that these disruptions have had on your staff?
Yeah, there's scars. This was unprecedented. It was damaging. People who take their commitment to provide care and compassion to their community really seriously, being called animals, being accused of horrific things. It's painful, and there are scars related to that. We still have caregivers, team members who are afraid for their safety. We still have caregivers and teams who now take a little different approach to some of their communication with families, a more cautious approach. We've had team members quit, move to other positions over the scars that this has caused.
Dr. Johnson, there's, again, a narrative, and you've seen some of it yourself this morning from the defendants, that what they were doing was in the interest of the safety and health of the infant. Do you have any doubt that it's their actions that put the safety and doubt of the infant at risk?
Their actions increased the risk for this infant and were dangerous to the care of this infant.
Are you proud of the job that you observed as you rounded that day and that you saw your medical team providing to this infant, that were providing that care that you described here today?
Yeah, I'm incredibly proud. I'm inspired by the way that our team stepped up in an impossible situation and continued to display compassion and care. Yeah, very proud.
Your Honor, I have no further questions for this witness.
May be excused.
You may, Your Honor.
Thank you, Doctor. You are excused.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson.
Thank you.
Plaintiffs may call their next witness.
We would call Jeff Erickson, Your Honor.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony about in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth?
Good morning, sir. Please state your full name and spell your last name for the record.
My name is Jeffrey Erickson, Erickson.
Thank you. Counsel, you may inquire.
Mr. Erickson, good morning. What's your relationship to Dr. Erickson?
She's my wife.
And how long have you been married?
We're coming up on our 15-year anniversary this month.
And can I ask you what you do for a living, Mr. Erickson?
Yes, I'm an aviation safety inspector with the Federal Aviation Administration.
And what are your duties and responsibilities in that role?
Investigation, oversight, and regulatory compliance with general aviation.
So, Mr. Erickson, I'd like to get a better understanding of how you and Dr. Erickson got to know each other, how long you've known each other. When did you first meet Dr. Erickson?
We started dating in December of 2001.
And where were you in December of 2000?
We were living in Las Vegas.
And were you in high school, college?
I was out of high school. She was still a senior in high school.
And how did you first get to meet Dr. Erickson?
My father works for her parents' company.
So you'd known her for a while?
I have, yes.
And in effect, have ever since she was a senior in high school, have you two been together?
We have.
And when did you first learn that Dr. Erickson or Natasha wanted to be a doctor?
Very early on in dating, she mentioned she'd want to be a doctor ever since she could remember.
Since you've known her, has that always been her career goal?
That has always been her goal.
And were you with Dr. Erickson as she went through the efforts and education to become a doctor?
I was.
And just as far as things you and Natasha or Dr. Erickson like to do, can you give us a sense of what any shared hobbies or experiences are that are of importance to you two?
We mostly now it's being with the kids, taking them out, letting them experience things, camping, hiking.
Let me back up. I think Dr. Erickson had touched on this, but could you remind us the ages of your children?
They are currently 10 and 6.
10 and 6. So is it fair to say you've known your wife extremely well for a very long time?
Yes, I have.
And can you give us a sense of Dr. Erickson's enjoyment of work, before any of this that's subject here? Can you give us a sense of how she was when she'd interact with you and talk about how her work as a doctor had gone?
Yeah, she's very caring. She really enjoys her work. She likes the challenges, both the ups and downs. And she's glad to be where she's at right now.
And before the events that led to this lawsuit occurred, can you share with us how Dr. Erickson, Natasha, would address any stress she had in her work career?
Yeah, she'd come home, she'd tell me about some difficult situations. We could talk it out. She relied on her faith and then her knowledge as a physician.
And let's move to, if we could, when some of these events happened, the events that led to this lawsuit occurred.
Yes.
When did you first learn that Natasha had been doxxed or identified by Mr. Bundy and Mr. Rodriguez?
She had gotten some messages from some colleagues and was able to pull up the website and saw her face on Freedom Man.
And did Natasha reach out to you?
Yeah, I believe I was sitting right there, and she said, "Oh my God, my face is on the website."
So you were with her when she opened up the website for the first time?
Yes.
Can you share with us how she reacted?
She was fearful. She was angry, nervous.
How did she express those emotions?
It was a little bit of chaos at the beginning because we didn't know what to expect. We didn't know what to do, who to reach out to.
And did you work with her to figure out a way to address that situation right then when you first became aware?
Yes, we worked it out. She contacted some of her colleagues and started discussing ways we could move forward and figure out what we needed to do.
And what if any steps did you and Natasha take? And again, we're right in that time frame when you first learned about it.
When we first learned about it, we had took the basic steps: block our doors, close our blinds, keep the kids inside. Didn't want them to go out and play out in the front yard. They couldn't go out there, ride their bikes. We didn't want to be necessarily seen outside. We didn't know what other information they had.
So if we could, Ms. Gamboa, could we go to previously introduced Exhibit 351 at page 241, I believe. And could you expand that, the middle section of that, Ms. Gamboa? And Mr. Erickson, does this look to be one of those images that you first saw with Dr. Erickson and Natasha that day?
Yes, that is the image.
Okay. And before this, did you or Natasha have any understanding as to who Diego Rodriguez was?
We did not.
Did you have any understanding as to who Ammon Bundy was?
I was aware of him, yes.
And what was your understanding?
That he had several confrontations with law enforcement, both in Nevada as well as in the Oregon Wildlife Refuge.
And when you first became aware of this website and started looking into it, did you start to click around the website?
Yes, we did.
And you were doing it together?
I think we were both on our devices, checking out separately.
Sitting next together?
Yes.
And can you share with us what you and Natasha were discussing as you started to learn more and click around these web pages?
We were just trying to figure out what information they had, what they knew. Did they know who they were, where we lived? Did they know anything about our kids? Did they know anything about family?
And once you had a chance to look at the websites, that website, what was the next step you and Natasha took?
We had somebody reach out and asked if they would like for us to have a police officer to come by the house, and we agreed. We had an undercover unit come by the house and discuss with us what to expect if they do show up, what they can do, what they can't do, anything we need to do to keep our family safe. We discussed having our kids go stay with some relatives, possibly outside the state at my parents' house. We discussed with our neighbors what was going on and that they had younger kids as well, that they should keep an eye out. And spoke with our kids and told them what all was going on and made sure they knew why we were doing this.
So if we could just touch on some of those items you mentioned. You mentioned that a police officer came by.
Correct.
And can you give the jury a better sense of what that police officer shared with you and Natasha as far as tips or advice?
Yeah, he was appeared to be an investigator that had been following Mr. Bundy for quite some time and his whole group, and determined that typically they would show up outside, they would cause a lot of ruckus, they would write things on the sidewalks, on the streets, they would yell, and out in front of our house, there wouldn't be much room to go around them if we need to leave for any reason. We'd have to go right past them. We live on a cul-de-sac, so it'd be hard to not. We'd pretty much be locked in our house until we were able to get out without passing by them.
Okay. And you mentioned some other steps you took, including having discussions as a family. Am I correct about that?
Yes, we did. Like I said, we talked about having the kids go stay with some relatives. We discussed whether or not we should discuss this with the school. Since it's in our neighborhood, we didn't know how much they offered. I also started carrying my sidearm more often that I didn't normally do very often. And
do you have some background in the military, Mr. Erickson?
I do. I was an Army combat medic.
You're an Army combat medic?
Yes, sir.
So again, just to back up just a little bit, can you share with us, your perception of what Natasha, how she was acting and experiencing things when she was having these conversations with you and your children right there when you first learned of Mr. Bundy's involvement and the police have indicated the seriousness of the situation?
Yeah, she was really upset, fearful, not sure what to expect. It's not a situation you plan on finding yourself in.
So you've outlined some steps, including you starting to wear your firearm more often. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Any steps you took to help address Natasha and your family's safety?
Yes, we installed security cameras around the house. And like I said, we kept doors locked. We notified the neighbors, be on the lookout for anything. And kept the kids not playing out in the front yard. And if they were out in the backyard, we were out there with them.
And did you start to notice, and again, I'd like to ask you, Mr. Erickson, kind of focus on that short period of time after Natasha first learns of the situation. Mm-hmm. Did you see anything, any changes in Natasha's actions or activities that struck you?
Yes, she was cautious of every person that she would encounter. If we'd go out somewhere, it's always on the back of her mind, who has seen the picture, who knows who she is. We addressed it with our church. she was going to volunteer in the nursery with the infants, and we had to bring it up with them that, we don't know who knows what. We don't know who may be in the congregation. Maybe one of the infants' parents might be part of this group, and so we wanted to let the church know that it might not be the best time for her to be able to volunteer and take care of the infants during the morning service.
And again, and help me out just as far as timing. Are we in the March and April 2022 period?
Correct, shortly after everything happened.
And you'd mentioned that she was was planning to volunteer at her church.
That's correct.
What type of volunteer work was she planning to do?
She'd be watching the infants and toddlers during the 10:30 service at church and caring for them while the parents were in their service.
And had she ever indicated to you whether that was something that was important to her?
It was very important to her. She's been wanting to volunteer with the church for quite some time and was able to make it work on when she's not working.
And you'd indicated that you and Natasha had some conversations with the church relating to that volunteer activity. Can you share exactly what those conversations were?
We just let them know the situation, and we didn't want it to come back on the church for any reason. So it was decided that she wouldn't volunteer in the nursery at that time.
So she paused?
She did.
And any other plans or activities that you can recall that were affected by what was happening to Natasha at this time period?
Just any time we would go anywhere, it was just always in the back of the mind. You don't know who's there. You don't know who knows what. It's all the unknown. It's kind of stressful in the background of in the back of your head, always thinking about it.
And at some point in time, obviously, Natasha decided to participate in this lawsuit, correct?
That's correct.
After she made that decision, has, from your perspective and based on Natasha's activities, has the harassment from the defendants slowed down at all?
It has not.
How would you characterize it as far as whether it's increased or decreased?
I believe it's increased. It's gotten constant. There's always a new social media post, a new video, a new interview on somebody's blog that's coming out.
And do you and Natasha, and I'm just asking from when you first found out to present, was Natasha reviewing these posts?
Yes, we were going through them all.
All of them?
As many as we could find.
And can you just share, as a husband, what you were seeing in your wife when she was going through all these different blogs, all these different posts?
It hurt her. It made her think about what she's doing, if she's in the right profession, if she's doing what she should be doing. It consumed her every thought.
And why is it that you say that it was consuming her every thought? What were you seeing from your perspective?
It was always a discussion about the lies they've been telling, everything that they've posted online, and there's really nothing that she could do about it because there's patient confidentiality, and it's frustrating that they can put all this information out there and there's no way to rebut it because you could be sued for.
Was Natasha bringing up to you the different variations on the false statements that were coming up about her?
Yes.
And can you share with us what that was like and what you were seeing in Natasha when she would identify some new variation on the false statements about her?
She would go through and pretty much everything they'd say would be a lie. She'd tell me, mostly why it was a lie, how she's not treating the patients right.
And Mr. Erickson, at some point in time in February of 2023, so after the lawsuit's underway, do you recall an instance where there was an article about Mr. Bundy that ended up being on the front page of the Idaho Press?
I do.
Dr. Erickson has shared some of that with us. Just can you give us kind of a walkthrough on how that occurred from your perspective as a husband and what those events were?
I believe I was traveling home from a work trip, and I got a text message that she said that she's going to have an article on the front page of the paper. So immediately, you go searching for it, try to find out what it is. Once I got home, she picked me up from the airport, and we immediately went to see if we can find an actual physical copy of it.
And were you able to find a physical copy of it?
We were. We had to go to 2 separate locations and buy it.
And did you also see that online?
Yes.
Okay. And, Your Honor, this document, Exhibit 127, was previously raised, but it needed to be redacted. We now have it was under consideration by the court based on need for redaction. We have now redacted it, Your Honor, and it's in your binder at 127. Your Honor, if that redaction is sufficient, we would ask for that document to be admitted.
So Exhibit 127 is allegedly a copy of an article published in the paper. The article itself is hearsay, but there are statements of the defendant in, so I'm allowing those statements that are included in the article. But I have ordered it redacted because it was written by someone who's not going to testify. So Exhibit 127 is now admitted in its redacted form and may be referenced by the witness.
And Ms. Gamboa, if you could go, thank you, Your Honor, if you could go to Plaintiff's Trial Exhibit 127, is this accurately reflect the online article that you first saw?
Yes, it does.
And is that the picture that ended up being on the front page of the Idaho Press?
I believe it is. I don't remember off the top of my head.
Best of your recollection?
Yes.
And Ms. Gamboa, could you go to the bottom of page 2 and just highlight that part? And do you recall this being a statement that was significant to your wife?
I do.
Could you read that for the jury?
Looks like St. Luke's CEO Chris Roth and the doctor that misdiagnosed baby Cyrus, Natasha Erickson, is asking for $7.5 million from Diego and I. Bundy then said in a statement that seemed like a lot since they are the ones that took baby Cyrus from his loving and caring parents.
Do you recall whether Natasha raised the issue of the impact of seeing the phrase she'd misdiagnosed the baby in the paper like that?
Yes, because she did not misdiagnose him.
And did she express urgency or concern about that being out there in the public?
Yes.
And what about that last part, that the ones who took baby Cyrus from loving and caring parents? Was that something that was of concern on that day for Natasha?
It was, because she didn't actually take the baby from the parents.
Can you give us a sense for how long Dr. Erickson continued to bring up and raise this particular news article?
I'm not sure exactly how long it was, but it always stayed in the back of the mind because it kind of seemed like a one-sided story from the newspaper that wasn't true and didn't provide both sides of the story.
That hurt her?
Yes.
So, and you'd mentioned that there continue to be video postings from Mr. Bundy.
Yes.
And they continue to expressly identify Dr. Erickson?
They do.
And have you reviewed these videos the best you can?
There's so many of them. I've reviewed as many as we possibly can.
And just to give us a sense for how you and Dr. Erickson address these new videos, are you the one who searches them out, or excuse me, that does the review, or is she the one who does the review?
We both do. Sometimes she'll find a new article that we haven't read or a new blog posting. Sometimes I'll find it and she'll find out about it, and I'll let her know. And
And do you and Dr. Erickson search the comments that come to the posts?
We look at the comments as well, yes.
Okay. And has Dr. Erickson ever expressed concern or fear based on the comments that are in there?
Yes, because a lot of times the people in the comments are unknown, just followers.
And do they sometimes express threats of violence against your wife?
They do.
And say extremely hateful things regarding your wife?
Yes.
Did you review a particular video made by Mr. Bundy in April 20 of 2023 in preparation for your testimony?
Yes.
And is it one you'd seen before?
It is.
Okay. Your Honor, we'd ask to admit two clips from Exhibit 204, which is an Ammon Bundy video of April 20, 2023. It's previously been authenticated through the McCraney Declaration. And Your Honor, what we would ask for would be for 204A, which would be a clip time of 2 minutes to 2 minutes and 34 seconds, and then 204B, which would be a clip time of 13 minutes, 15 seconds to 13 minutes, 27 seconds.
The court's going to admit Exhibits 204A and 204B, which are video clips, and they may be published.
And I told her, I go, the people should have tore down the hospital to go get that baby. You know, if we had to, we should have done that. She just couldn't get her mind wrapped around that. And that's what kind of blows me away. Am I alone in this thinking that, look, that we have a right to defend ourselves? Am I thinking straight, or am I wrong? I mean, you know, if I'm wrong, I need therapy, I think.
Can you play the next one, 204B?
Dr. Erickson, Natasha is a wicked person for instigating this and going on with this. She allowed her name to be on the lawsuit. She's the one who instigated this case.
And have you been with Natasha when she's viewed videos like this of Ammon Bundy naming her directly?
Yes.
Does that have a particular or exaggerated effect when she has to hear Ammon Bundy get aggressive and name her directly?
Yes, it does.
She ever expressed why?
Because he keeps reiterating the same things over and over that are false.
And is it fair to say that in your review of what Mr. Bundy continues to post to this day, that your wife is continuing to be named directly by Mr. Bundy in the context of these false statements and false conspiracies?
He is.
You touched on this a little bit before, but I wanted to make sure I understood this. You'd indicated that you've known your wife since she was a senior in high school, correct?
Correct.
And she if I understood you correctly, has she expressed some concern or about her ability to continue on as a doctor?
Yes, it has affected her to the point that she has considered leaving medicine.
Is that something you ever thought you'd hear from her?
No.
Has your wife expressed concerns about your family?
Yes, she has.
Can you share, any indications of concern for your children that your wife has expressed?
It's all the unknown. We'd have no idea what additional information is out there, what they're going to find out, what they're going to do. It's always in the back of your mind.
Do you know do you have any sense as to what Dr. Erickson's going to decide as to whether or not she's going to continue being a doctor?
She plans on continuing to be a doctor. She doesn't want to let them win and make the decision during this time that's been challenging.
Mr. Erickson, thank you. I don't have any further questions, Your Honor.
May this witness be excused?
Yes, he may, Your Honor.
Thank you, sir. You are excused. Clients may call their next witness.
Tracy Youngman, Your Honor.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this matter and before the court should be the truth, the whole truth?
Just make sure you're clear and concise and close to the mic, please.
Good morning. Could you please state your full name and spell your last name just for the record?
Sure. Tracy Youngman, Jungman.
Very good. Counsel, you may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor.
I liked his binder better.
Ms. Youngman, where are you employed?
I work at St. Luke's Cares. Excuse me.
And we've heard about St. Luke's Cares a little bit, but can you give us kind of what St. Luke's Cares is, especially as it relates to your role?
Sure. St. Luke's Cares, we are a medical clinic. We see pediatric patients primarily. We are also a nationally accredited child advocacy program.
What does that mean to be a nationally accredited child advocacy program?
So essentially it means that we adhere to the strict guidelines that are set forth by the National Children's Alliance to ensure that we're providing appropriate and specialized care for children.
And you've used the term child advocacy and specialized care. Can you explain what's involved in specialized care and child advocacy in this context?
So we see children when there is any concern for any type of neglect or abuse.
And how long have you been in that role at St. Luke's Cares?
About 6 years.
And if I could, Ms. Youngman, I'd just like to back up a little bit and get a better understanding of kind of your background and what led you to that role, if I could. First, where'd you graduate from college?
My undergraduate degree was from Boise State University.
And what was that degree in?
It was a Bachelor's of Science in Nursing degree.
And about when did you graduate?
2002.
2002. And after you graduated from Boise State, where'd you go next?
Home. I had a baby, so I took about 5 months off, and then I started at St. Luke's later in 2002.
And what drew you to St. Luke's?
I had done some rotations there during my nursing school and appreciated the St. Luke's community.
And what was your first role there?
I was a staff nurse on the pediatrics floor.
And what does that mean?
Essentially, I was assigned a certain number of patients to provide care for during my shift.
So sounds like your first job was in pediatrics?
Yes.
What was it that drew you to pediatrics?
I can't imagine not taking care of kids. They're fun, they're resilient, they make you just want to take care of them.
And after that first role, did you obtain a different role at St. Luke's?
I did. I've been through several different roles at St. Luke's over the years.
So could you just kind of give us an overview of your roles at St. Luke's?
Sure. For about the first 10 years, I worked on and off part-time as I had children. I, in addition to being a staff nurse, was a charge nurse for a period of time, which means that I was basically kind of in charge of the other nursing staff and other staff during my shift. I then became a patient care coordinator, which entails a lot of discharge planning, especially for medically complicated children, and coordinating their care while they're in the hospital.
At some point, did you decide to get some additional medical training?
I did.
And when was that?
In 2014, I started nurse practitioner school.
And hear that term a lot, but can you explain to us really what the difference is between a nurse practitioner and the role you had before as a nurse?
A nurse practitioner has the ability to diagnose and treat patients independently.
And what was it that motivated you to obtain that additional training and education?
I watched the ability and the impact that other providers that I worked with, including Dr. Erickson, were able to have on families and the care, and I wanted to do that also.
And you were obviously able to reach that milestone, correct?
Yes.
Okay. About when was that you became a nurse practitioner?
2016.
And did your role at St. Luke's change after that?
Yes. I had, in the interim period, I had in about 2012, there was a pediatric hospitalist program that had started at St. Luke's, and I was the program coordinator for that program when it started. And then when I graduated, I became a provider with the program.
And at some point, you then transitioned over to CARES?
I did.
And when was that?
That was well, that's a tricky question because in 2017 I went officially to CARES, but actually in the year prior I had been recruited by one of the physicians at CARES and had been working with them about 1 day a week. But I went full-time to CARES in 2017.
And what was your motivation in moving full-time to CARES?
I had seen, I had worked with some of the providers at CARES while I was working inpatient and had seen some of the cases that they had to deal with and had been able to participate and help in that a little bit myself. And that was where my heart was, and I knew I needed to be there.
So we've talked a little bit about CARES. Can you explain to the jury the different types of maltreatment that CARES helps address?
So we see patients if there are concerns for sexual abuse. We see a fair amount of that, and then physical abuse and different types of neglect.
And can you talk about the different types of neglect that you deal with?
Sure. It spans everything from educational neglect to supervisory neglect, nutritional neglect, medical neglect.
And given its relevance to this case, can you explain a little bit more about what medical neglect is in this context?
Sure. Medical neglect is essentially when a child's medical needs are not being met.
And does CARES have a mission statement or a mission goal?
We do have some sort of a mission statement, but I cannot recall it now.
How would you articulate what CARES' mission statement is for you?
Well, so CARES stands for Children at Risk Evaluation Services, and I think just we provide a really, really important role in the community and for the children that are at risk and need our services.
So, Ms. Youngman, has that been rewarding since you moved to CARES?
Yes.
And you feel like you've been able to help and provide care where it's been needed?
Absolutely.
Any other organizations or similar clinics to CARES in the Valley?
So CARES has there's a CARES that operates in Twin Falls part-time. It's a little bit different than ours. And then CARES also contracts with the Nampa Family Justice Center. A few days a week we go out there and provide services. We have a brand new mobile clinic, So we actually go and provide services to kids that are in about 7 or 8 surrounding communities. And we have a subclinic called the WIN Clinic, which it stands for Weight Intervention Nutrition. And we see kids in that clinic that have issues gaining weight, many of them infants.
And that's all the CARES, that's all, you were describing services of the CARES Clinic you're involved with, correct?
Yes.
The organization.
Yes.
And does CARES provide services to law enforcement?
We do. We work closely with law enforcement and other agencies.
And how does CARES work with law enforcement as it relates to, it's neglected or abused children?
So when we see a child, if law enforcement is involved, we will provide them with medical information regarding the case.
And can you explain to us what you mean by medical information regarding the case in this context?
Sure. So if we see a child who, for instance, has physical injuries or there's concerns for medical neglect or other types of neglect, we can kind of serve as a liaison and explain the medical findings and our recommendations.
Okay. And does CARES provide services or help for the Department of Health and Welfare?
Yes.
In what way?
In a similar capacity. We will work with them on cases where kids are in the custody of Health and Welfare, or they're involved in some other way, and again, discuss our assessment and our recommendations with them regarding those children.
If we could, I'd like to move to March 11th, if we could.
Okay.
When did you first become aware of or learn of the infant in this case?
It was mid-afternoon on March 11th, 2022.
And how is it that you became aware of the infant?
One of the safety assessors for Region 4 Health and Welfare had come to my office and requested that I provide some medical information regarding a referral she had received on the infant.
And can you describe her title again?
She was a safety assessor.
And what is the role of a safety assessor?
So the way I understand it, when a referral comes into Health and Welfare, if it is deemed something that needs to be looked into right then, it is assigned to a safety assessor, which is typically a social worker.
And then if the circumstances are correct, they'll reach out to you?
Yes.
And in this instance, you were contacted by a safety assessment worker with DHW, correct?
Yes.
And the jury's heard testimony from Director Jepson you were present for, in which he described one of the folks who worked with him who was a former refugee. Is this the person we're talking about?
Yes.
Okay. So, and we'll just refer to her as Ms. L, if that's okay.
Okay.
Given her current situation. When Ms. L contacted you, can you share what just the substance of that first conversation regarding the infant?
She reported that she had received a referral earlier that day regarding this infant and some concerns for him being malnourished. There had been a referral that had come in from a different office, and she was requesting for me to review whatever records were available and provide some recommendations.
Did she indicate to you where the referral had come from?
I believe that she told me it was from the infant's patient care provider.
So primary care provider.
Right.
And so what steps did you take then after receiving this information? I would guess, is it properly characterized a request from Ms. L?
Yes.
What steps did you take after you received this request from Ms. L?
I reviewed the available records in our electronic medical records system.
And what were you able to see when you did that?
Not very much. The only records I could really find were the hospitalization from the prior week, and then a few kind of telephone documentation encounters regarding home health visits attempting to be scheduled.
Okay. And just what was the next step in your process after doing that review?
I attempted to reach back out to Ms. L. and was unsuccessful.
What was the next step in the process after that?
I contacted a sergeant with the Meridian Police Department that works closely with his cases to let he and his crew also know of my concerns.
And is that typical for you to reach out to law enforcement in that way?
If it's something where I feel like there needs to be something done right away, I will often reach out to law enforcement.
And what, if anything, do you recall regarding that first connection with law enforcement?
When I spoke with the sergeant, he was already aware of the infant and the condition and the concerns, and he informed me that he already had a couple of his detectives that were trying to locate the infant.
And just to help us with the context, Ms. Youngman, are there officers in Meridian and perhaps in other police departments too that specialize in these type of cases?
Yes.
So had you had prior dealings and experiences with these doctors in Meridian, with these law enforcement officers in Meridian?
Yes, many.
Okay. And after you became aware that Meridian PD was already looking into this issue, what was the next step, or your next step in involvement, I guess I should say, relating to the infant?
I waited until I was able to connect again with Miss L. and informed her that I was concerned, kind of based on the records that I was able to see in the system, and that I felt like the infant needed to be seen medically that day.
Okay. And what was it that was causing you concern that the infant should be seen medically that day?
Following discharge from the hospital the week prior, he had been seen, this was on a Friday, he had been seen on Monday in the clinic that had initiated the referral, and had lost weight since being discharged from the hospital, which was concerning in and of itself. And then he, earlier that day, had not come to the pre-scheduled follow-up appointment to have his weight checked. And it sounded as if the family was not returning the phone calls from that same clinic to reschedule that visit.
So why, Ms. Youngman, was it so significant in your mind that the infant be rechecked?
We were heading into the weekend, and I knew if he, it had been several days since he had been weighed already, and I was concerned for his health, and that if he continued to lose weight, that his situation would worsen clinically.
And the jury's heard some testimony about the infant's condition. Could you just share with us, your perception regarding the amount of weight was lost and how that factored into your concern?
Sure. So if I recall, he had lost a little over an ounce, which I know doesn't sound like a lot, but that's a fair amount for someone who's already very, very low on the growth curve.
And after this communication, what was the next step in the process that you were involved in?
When I had spoken with Miss L, I informed her that I was more than willing to stay and see the child, that they could bring him in later that afternoon. And she had phoned the parents and spoken with the father directly, and he had agreed to come and do that.
Okay. And that was communicated to you?
Yes.
Okay. And what, if anything, was your response when Ms. L indicated that to you?
I just made arrangements with the front desk to facilitate that appointment and requested that he be there by 4, that they be there by 4.
Okay. What happened at 4 o'clock?
They didn't come.
And what steps did you take, if any, after that?
I let Miss L know that they had not come, and then I also reached out to law enforcement and let them know, Detective Fuller specifically, that the patient had not come and that I was concerned.
Why did you reach out to Detective Fuller?
When I had spoken with the sergeant, I knew that Detective Fuller was one that was assigned to the case.
Okay. And what do you recall regarding that communication with Detective Fuller?
I remember just telling him I'm worried about this kid, and I really think he needs to be seen somewhere by someone.
And do you recall what, if anything, was communicated to you by Detective Fuller?
I don't recall.
What was the next step in the communications?
I received a call from Detective Fuller and some of his co-workers a little bit later that afternoon.
So you said you received a call from a number of people. Was this a speakerphone call?
Yes. Yes.
Who do you recall, who, to your understanding, was involved in that call?
Sergeant Fegal, Detectives Hansen, and Detective Fuller.
And that was the Detective Fuller that testified here earlier in the case?
That's right.
What do you recall regarding that conference call, or group call, I guess I should call it?
They were still trying to locate the infant at that time. I again reiterated that I thought it was critical that he be seen that day somewhere. And I gave them some ideas of things they could look for to kind of help assess the patient's state, the infant's state, if they were to find him.
And were these indications that you provided, were they in response to a request from the detectives?
Yes.
And do you recall what type of, what you told the detectives, or what did you communicate the detectives should be looking for?
I told them I would look specifically at his level of alertness. Was he awake? Was he engaging and interacting as you would expect a child his age to be doing? Did he look dehydrated? Did he have sunken eyes? What was his color like? Those sorts of things.
Okay. And again, just so we can make sure, you said you were concerned to let this go unchecked before the weekend, correct?
Yes.
Specifically, what were your concerns as to what potentially might happen to the infant if he was unchecked before the weekend?
If he continued to lose weight or not gain weight, his clinical condition could significantly deteriorate.
Deteriorate to what point?
I mean, you can have, organ failure and even death.
After that group call, did you place that in time? At around 5 o'clock, I believe?
That sounds right.
When was your next communication relating to the infant?
The next morning.
The next morning? And when were you contacted in the morning, or I guess I should say, how were you contacted in the morning?
Early in the morning, it was probably between 7 and 8, I received a text that included a link from a coworker, a medical assistant at CARES.
Okay. And just so make sure we're clear on the time to the jury, this would be on March 12th, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you said you saw a link, correct?
That's right.
And what was that a link to?
It was a link of Ammon Bundy. There was a video clip of him discussing the arrest, his arrest at the hospital the night before.
Is that one of the clips we've seen here in this case?
Yes.
What, if anything, and did you have any understanding regarding Mr. Bundy before you saw that clip?
Yes.
And what was your understanding?
I recognized him as being a political extremist and someone that had been engaged and had actually directed multiple somewhat violent confrontations, including law enforcement previously.
And you saw the video from Mr. Bundy, you indicated, correct?
I did.
Okay. And in that video, did he make any representations regarding the health of the infant?
He was saying that the infant was perfectly healthy.
Based on the records you reviewed, what was your reaction to hearing Mr. Bundy take that position?
It was false. His allegations were completely false.
So hearing these allegations stated by Mr. Bundy, what, if anything, was your next step then? What was the next action you took?
I knew that he was at the Boise Hospital and that there would be a request for CARES to come and do a consult. So I reached out to that provider.
And when you say he was going to be at the hospital, you're referring to the infant?
Yes.
Okay. Did you go directly to the hospital?
I did.
Okay. And about what time did you arrive at the hospital?
It was probably between 8 and 9.
And what, if anything, what was your first action when you got to that hospital at around 8 or 9 on March 12th?
I went directly to the patient's room and observed him lying in his crib, and there were several staff members around, nurses, that were attempting to place an IV line to rehydrate him with fluids.
All right. I think you're kind of changing topics at this point.
This would be a good stop report, Your Honor.
Okay. Thank you. So make a note of where you're at, counsel. Ladies and gentlemen, I have other matters I need to take up at noon. So I'm going to excuse you for the day. We're going to start again tomorrow at 8:30. And tomorrow, I believe we go, Mr. Clerk, until 5? Until 5. We'll have lunch brought in for you. Over the evening recess, do not allow yourself to be approached about the case. Do not do any research about the case. And if you get here early, do not deliberate with any juror until the case is submitted to you by the court. So 8:30 tomorrow morning. Thank you very much. Please be seated. Okay. Anything we need to take up before we start at 8:30 tomorrow?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. And let's have you here at 8:15 just in case something else comes up. And we're getting certain documents from you today. Certain pleadings will be filed by the end of the day, Ms. Jensen?
That's correct.
Okay.
Jury instructions, special verdict form, and adverse inference briefing.
Okay. I'm sure your jury form, special verdict already reflects this, but as to each count, the jury can reach a verdict, and it only requires 9 of the 12 jurors who are deliberating to reach that verdict. So what I think every question's we're going to need to know how many of the jurors voted for their verdict. And we can add that later, but I don't think we do it to the whole verdict. I think we break it apart by question to make sure it's clear how many jurors supported whatever proposition is being presented to them. Does that make sense, Ms. Jensen?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. I've given a little bit of thought to the Thursday request, and I'm inclined to do that after we're done with the jury, which may make for a little bit longer day, but I just want to maximize the jury time. And with that happening outside the presence of the jury, I don't know if it is or is not possible to possibly get to closings on Friday or not.
We anticipate getting closings on Friday.
You do?
We do.
Okay. And do you have any estimate as far as your length of your closing counsel?
No longer than an hour and a half.
Okay, very good. All right, then have a nice evening, and we'll see you tomorrow at 8:15. And I don't know, I'm going to do something else. Mr. Clerk will be here if you want to talk to him about exhibits, if there's any clarification that needs to be reached on our end. But this might be a good time. All right, thank you.